The story began with a young man reflecting on the course of his life. His father had died when he and his sister were still children, leaving their mother to shoulder the burden of raising them. She urged her son to become a shaman, convinced that he possessed an uncommon potential and that the spirits themselves would watch over him. She warned him that choosing another path would invite calamity, and she insisted that he study the sacred traditions of shamanism. His early lessons included poetry, magic, and obscure practices that seemed strange to him. From an early age, however, the young man understood exactly what he wanted. The lessons of spirits and rituals held no attraction, so he abandoned them and devoted himself instead to scientific research. 10 years of tireless effort established him as a respected scholar, accepted fully into society. Yet despite his diligence, fate struck him down suddenly beneath the wheels of a car. His mother's warning had proven true, and misfortune had indeed caught him. Still, the most astonishing revelation came afterward. Death did not end his journey. Rebirth revealed to him that life was not confined to a single existence. Through this awakening, he realized the truth behind his mother's words. Some truths could only be grasped through experience. As these memories resurfaced, his hand fell against the open pages of a textbook. Gathering his composure, he addressed the students seated before him and declared that the lesson was beginning. Today, they would continue working on the construction of a magic circle. He stood now as a professor at the Academy of Magic, though the path to this role stretched back to earlier days. The story turned to a city teeming with life. At the station, crowds of people pushed forward, handing their tickets to the inspector before boarding the waiting carriages. The inspector greeted each passenger politely, wishing them a safe journey. Among them was a dark-haired young man, who presented his ticket before proceeding toward the fourth carriage, third compartment. Inside, he discovered an elderly man occupying his seat, calmly reading a newspaper. The young man greeted him with courtesy, and the elderly passenger acknowledged him with a nod. They settled across from each other, the quiet only broken when the train began to move. For a while, the young man kept his attention on a book, but soon his eyes lifted to the bold headline visible on the newspaper. It announced that the civil war in the Utah Kingdom had ended with victory for the princess faction. A faint smile touched his lips as he reflected that the conflict had finally ended. The elderly man lowered his newspaper and regarded him with a narrowed gaze before agreeing. He, too, had awaited the war's conclusion for a long time. The young man recalled how recently the prince's faction had recruited soldiers, and he was relieved that the fighting had not dragged on further. Realizing his manners had been lacking, he introduced himself as Ludger Cherish. His companion set the paper aside and replied that he was Gerard, explaining that he carried no family name. Gerard observed that Ludger must be of noble birth, but Ludger admitted he belonged to a fallen house and asked that it be disregarded. Gerard accepted this without judgment. When Ludger asked about his journey, Gerard replied that he was bound for Lindebrunn, the capital of the empire and a popular destination for travelers. Ludger remarked that Exilian was famed for its magical technology and indeed offered much to see. He himself was traveling to Riederbelke, intending to take up a post at sea or an academy. Gerard's eyebrows rose in surprise, remarking that Ludger seemed young for such a position. Ludger brushed his hand through his hair with slight awkwardness, insisting it was merely fortune. Their conversation turned back to the war. Ludger mentioned rumors of a man who had influenced the outcome, a mercenary named Machiavelli who possessed neither magical training nor knightly status. Gerard dismissed it at first, believing it to be idle gossip, yet Ludger's tone carried conviction. This mercenary had wandered through life in search of a singular object. The name Machiavelli, Ludger knew, belonged to his own previous existence. Gerard then asked whether Ludger would indeed be teaching second-year students. Ludger confirmed this, prompting Gerard to express amazement at such responsibility from the outset. His expression suddenly shifted, his gaze turning to the window. Before Ludger could ask, a violent explosion shook the train. Smoke spread as passengers cried out. Ludger speculated that the engine might have failed, but Gerard shook his head sharply. The engine was protected by magic. This was deliberate sabotage. Bandits were targeting the train, most likely wealthy merchants or nobles. He explained that such an explosion suggested the presence of a magician among them. Urging caution, Gerard proposed hiding or escaping. Ludger, however, insisted on investigating. Adjusting his hat, he moved into the corridor, finding it eerily empty. Gerard followed reluctantly, troubled for the safety of others. Ludger explained that the compartments were sealed by protective spells, but Gerard warned that such wards could be broken by skilled attackers. They speculated that the bandits' true goal lay in the first-class carriages, where nobles traveled. Gerard advised waiting for border guards, yet before they could act, a rope smashed through the window. A bandit swung inside, breaking the glass. Ludger shielded Gerard, stepping forward as the intruder drew a dagger. With a swift gesture, Ludger conjured a sphere of magical energy and hurled it, sending the man crashing into the wall. Gerard asked if the man had been killed, but Ludger reassured him that the assailant was merely immobilized. Approaching, Ludger demanded answers, but the bandit laughed bitterly and spat insults. Pulling open his shirt, he revealed a bomb strapped to his chest with only 1 second remaining. Gerard shouted desperately, but the detonation came before they could move. Fire and smoke engulfed the carriage. Gerard survived by throwing himself to the ground and covering his head. Rising in shock, he called for Ludger, but his words faltered. The carriage wall had been ripped apart, leaving a gaping hole. Both Ludger and the bandit were gone. Gerard stepped to the breach, whispering Ludger's name. Blood marked his cheek, and he cursed, lamenting the ruin of his finely made suit. With a heavy sigh, he tore away his mask, revealing his true face, that of a young man with long dark hair. Once more, the young man had found himself at the center of calamity. There was no particular reason why he chose the name Machiavelli. He had simply borrowed it from a figure remembered from his past life. What mattered was not the origin of the name, but the new persona it represented. Adopting this identity allowed him to reshape himself and avoid unnecessary danger while traveling. To survive, he needed a mask, and Machiavelli's image served that purpose. The day had been long and trying. As he left the battlefield, Gerald realized that he had drawn more attention than intended. He regretted not maintaining his secrecy. Fortunately, the princess and her faction had emerged victorious, creating a moment of distraction that gave him the chance to conceal himself. Once the soldiers relaxed their guard, he slipped away and boarded a train bound for Lindebrunn. Now, seated within its carriage, he closed his eyes and reflected bitterly on how misfortune seemed to pursue him at every turn. In the aftermath of the explosion, Gerald discarded the broken mask from the moving train and wished silently for peace that seemed always out of reach. He wondered about the ambush, questioning who would dare orchestrate such a brazen attack in broad daylight. Normal bandits would never go so far as to sacrifice one of their own with a suicide bombing. Only someone utterly deranged, willing to kill indiscriminately, could attempt such an act. To Gerald, it appeared their true target had not been the passengers but the train itself. His thoughts were interrupted by a conductor rushing into the carriage. The man, shocked by the wreckage, asked if Gerald was unharmed. Gerald did not answer at first, his sharp eyes studying the man closely. When the conductor asked what had happened, Gerald finally responded, explaining that armed bandits had launched the assault and were likely advancing toward the lead car. He warned the man not to interfere. The conductor suggested that the passengers should be evacuated through the rear of the train and moved as if to give instructions, but his words never came. In a sudden motion, Gerald seized him by the throat and slammed him to the floor. The man gasped and demanded to know what Gerald was doing. Gerald's voice was cold as he told him to drop the act. Bandits would never strike at random, especially with the protective enchantments breaking at the exact moment of attack. Such sabotage could only be achieved with insider knowledge of the train's mechanisms. Fear spread across the man's face as he realized he had been exposed. His hand shifted, and a dagger slipped from his sleeve, but Gerald intercepted the movement instantly. Restraining him, Gerald demanded to know who he was and why he was here. The man remained silent, trembling as Gerald forced him forward. A faint sound from outside drew Gerald's attention. His instincts sharpened, and without hesitation he shoved the man forward. Bullets tore through the air, striking the false conductor. Gerald ducked low, avoiding the barrage. Narrowing one eye, he thought grimly about the signal that must have been given. Everything had been orchestrated with precision. Several armed men burst into the carriage. One of them scanned the wreckage and asked if there were survivors, while another expressed disbelief that Gerald had evaded their gunfire. Rising to his feet, Gerald warned them coldly not to imagine they could kill him. Their leader ordered them to fire, but when the bandits pulled their triggers, their weapons jammed. Confusion spread quickly. One realized that their guns had been disabled, and their gazes turned to the glow of magical energy hovering above Gerald's palm. Horror filled their eyes as they understood he was a mage. Streams of energy shimmered in the air as Gerald cast his suppression. The bandits' own magical strength dissipated uselessly. Their commander clenched his jaw, realizing what had happened. He admitted grudgingly that he had not expected to face a magician aboard the train and ordered Gerald to surrender. More men entered from the opposite side, weapons raised. Their mage leader, perhaps of the 4th rank, demanded that Gerald hold still if he valued a swift death. Gerald calculated the situation, noting that nearly 10 minutes had passed since the first explosion. Reinforcements would not arrive soon. He could not wait. Without hesitation, he vaulted through the gap in the train's wall. Shock rippled through the bandits. One of them, Hansen, peered outside and declared that Gerald was gone, likely frightened into leaping. Before his sentence ended, His head was pierced by an attack from above. They looked up in horror, realizing Gerald had reached the roof. His movements defied their understanding, and some speculated he had used flight magic, though none knew if such a feat was possible on a moving train. Their mage silenced them and ordered a search. While several men remained behind, others advanced to the first carriage. Bullets tore into the roof as Gerald ran, narrowly avoiding them. The mage calculated his path, ordering his men to pursue. Yet as they reached the connecting door, an explosion erupted, blasting them backward. Survivors screamed, bewildered by how Gerald had prepared such traps so swiftly. The mage studied him with unease, realizing Gerald's methods were unlike those of any magician he had known. His efficiency and precision resembled that of a hunter, perhaps even a mercenary. A sharp metallic sound jolted the group. Their mage cursed when he realized Gerald was separating the carriages. Sparks and light filled the air as the train broke apart. The rear car began to fall behind, leaving the rest to surge ahead. Fury filled the mage's voice as he swore vengeance. He would remember Gerald's face and kill him. Before he could finish, his eyes widened at the surge of overwhelming magical power. Turning, he saw Gerald standing in the carriage, a glowing circle forming before him. A beam of magic burst forth, tearing through the walls and leaving devastation in its path. The mage screamed at his men to flee, but most were consumed by the blast. When the smoke cleared, only the mage remained standing, gravely wounded yet alive. He glared at Gerald and accused him of slaughtering patriots who had fought for peace. Gerald's frown deepened. He reminded him that it was they who had tried to kill him first. If they intended to hunt him, then he had no choice but to end it here. The mage opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, an ice blade pierced his body. Gerald paused in surprise, realizing the strike had not come from him. Through a breach in the wall, Veronica appeared. She glanced at the fallen mage and then at Gerald, asking if he was unharmed. Deciding that he looked shaken, she reassured him calmly. The Knights of Cold Steel had arrived. The bandits cursed as they realized the Knights of Cold Steel had already arrived. They raised their rifles, startled that the knights were flying even through the storm. One knight conjured a magical barrier before his body, and the barrage of bullets vanished harmlessly. With the shield still burning on his arm, he summoned energy into his palm and charged. The first bandit recoiled in terror, his scream cut short as the knight struck with explosive force. Pivoting, the knight dispatched another enemy who collapsed under the impact of his magic. When both had fallen, the knight announced that the second carriage was secure. Another voice echoed the same about the first carriage, adding that the passengers were safe. A third knight approached Lieutenant Veronica DeVille and requested permission to report. He declared that the entire train was now under control. Veronica praised their work and ordered them to ensure the passengers reached the next station unharmed. Soon after, the train pulled into Rebirth station. Crowds had gathered on the platform, buzzing with speculation about the attack. Gerald remained in his seat, staring through the window, lost in thought. The carriage door opened, and Veronica entered. She asked about his condition and whether he had been injured during the assault. Gerald replied that he was fine thanks to the intervention of the knights, explaining that he had simply been thinking. Relieved, Veronica smiled and introduced herself formally as Lieutenant Veronica DeVille. Gerald acknowledged her words with a slight nod. Before he could respond further, another voice intruded. A man stepped forward, addressing Veronica. He confirmed her identity as the commander of the White Steel Knights. After she affirmed it, the man produced identification, naming himself Officer Lemlis from Rebirth Police. He mentioned the terrorist assault in the arid mountains and asked to cooperate in the investigation. Veronica stated that the attackers had been eliminated, yet Lemlis noted oddities in the report. Gerald tensed at the remark. Veronica demanded clarification, and Lemlis explained that the bandits had overtaken the train too quickly. Even with magical reinforcement, they should not have breached the train's defenses so easily. He suggested that an accomplice might have been aboard. Veronica considered his words carefully and admitted the reasoning sounded possible. Lemlis reminded her that this was only a hypothesis. Their task was not to arrest anyone but to confirm identities. She agreed and then turned to Gerald, asking if he had heard their discussion. He nodded silently. Veronica assured him that honesty was all that mattered. A calm mask covered Gerald's face, but his thoughts churned with unease. His papers passed scrutiny, yet his ruined mask and mismatched age threatened exposure. If anyone investigated too deeply, his secret would surface. At best, he would face the gallows. At worst, slow torture awaited. Veronica's gentle smile did little to ease him, for he knew her reputation. If she sensed deceit, her blade would fall without hesitation. Lemlis interrupted Gerald's silence, apologizing for the inconvenience. He explained that it was necessary to verify the passenger list and asked for Gerald's ticket. Gerald produced it, and the attendant confirmed it was seat 430. Lemlis examined the record, noting that the registered traveler was a man of 45, while Gerald appeared only 25. He asked about the second passenger assigned to the seat. Gerald calmly replied that the man had perished during the explosion, falling from a cliff in the arid mountains. Lemlis narrowed his eyes but then instructed Gerald to remain where he was. Gerald's nerves tightened, sensing his cover unraveling. Veronica interjected, defending him. She reminded Lemlis that Gerald had fought the bandits directly. A traitor would never have done so. Lemlis stared at Gerald in surprise, confirming if he had truly resisted the attackers. Gerald remained composed as Lemlis apologized for doubting him, calling him by name. Inwardly, Gerald faltered, startled that his assumed identity had been spoken aloud. Lemlis continued, remarking that Gerald had been appointed to Seoran Academy. Veronica too was shocked and questioned whether this was true. Both turned toward him. Gerald finally smiled, lifted his suitcase, placed his hat on his head, and declared that he was indeed the new professor, Ludger Cherish. When they departed the station, Lemlis again apologized for the trouble. Ludger thanked him, stating that the knight's efforts had allowed him to arrive safely. Lemlis insisted on accompanying him to the academy. Ludger declined, explaining he preferred to travel alone. Lemlis objected, insisting the future of the empire rested in his hands. Ludger remained firm, telling him he had other matters to attend. Seeing his resolve, Lemlis relented. Ludger remarked that though his time with Veronica had been brief, he was glad to have met her. Veronica returned the sentiment, hoping their paths would cross again. As Ludger walked away, he reflected privately. He thanked the real Ludger for saving his life, relieved that blurred photographs made it impossible to distinguish the two. Now he had the chance to vanish and assume a new identity. His thoughts halted when someone called his name. Turning, he saw a man approach. The newcomer introduced himself as Wolford, a staff member of Seoran Academy. He explained that upon hearing of the incident, he had come to meet Ludger and ensure his safety. Despite his reluctance, Ludger boarded Wolford's carriage. The mechanical horses carried them steadily forward. Ludger sat with his hands interlaced under his chin, analyzing the situation. Wolford's physique and composure suggested knighthood, raising suspicion. Escape now would be dangerous, so Ludger postponed any attempt. Gerard was dead in the eyes of the world, and Ludger Cherish lived in his place. For now, the deception provided the perfect alibi. Eventually Wolford announced their arrival at Seoran Academy. As the carriage entered the vast estate, Ludger marveled at the size of the grounds, far grander than expected. Wolford guided him to the rector's office, offering to carry his luggage. Inside, a woman sat behind a desk, her name Eliza Willow. She greeted him warmly, saying she had been waiting for him. Eliza Willow, the director of Seoran Academy, welcomed Ludger into her office. She asked if he was unharmed, explaining that she had already heard reports about the terrorist attack on the train. Ludger replied that he had been fortunate since the Knights of Cold Steel had arrived in time to save the passengers. Eliza smiled warmly, folding her hands with relief, and admitted that she was glad nothing had happened to him. She added that if he had been harmed, the Academy would have faced consequences as well. Ludger, however, found her candor difficult to understand. He could not comprehend how she spoke so openly about the Academy's interests, yet he pushed aside his doubts, more concerned about the peculiar sensation he had felt the moment he entered her office. He told himself it was his imagination, yet he wondered whether Eliza had encountered the real Ludger Cherish before. As she continued to smile at him, he questioned silently whether she already suspected his secret. Eliza then remarked that they had now officially met face to face and observed that he was taller and more striking than she had expected. She even speculated that he would surely become popular among the students. Rising from her seat, she handed him a folder, explaining its contents as if to confirm what he had already heard. The document described his salary, the length of the contract, and additional benefits. The contract was valid for 2 years, with meals and housing fully provided by the Academy. Ludger accepted the folder and reviewed the details, initially indifferent. He had no real intention of committing long-term, believing that he would eventually find a chance to escape. However, his attention froze on the numbers listed. The monthly salary was 30 imperial gold coins. When he converted the sum in his mind, he calculated that it equaled 30 million dinars, the equivalent of 300 million won. The staggering amount left him shocked. He wondered if he had misread, but the numbers did not change. Observing his reaction, Eliza asked what he thought of the terms, remarking that they were exceptional. Ludger agreed outwardly and concealed his astonishment, though inside he labeled the contract madness. It felt like an extraordinary stroke of luck. He cautioned himself to remain calm, reasoning that if the professors received such salaries, then the expectations must be equally high. He knew little about teaching, and an academy was a gathering place for prodigies. Despite his concerns, Ludger understood that refusal would only bring suspicion. His position was already established, and he had no option but to accept. He reminded himself that deception was his strength. He could bluff, improvise, and read the people around him. With composure restored, he announced that he was satisfied with the terms and ready to sign. He reasoned that the knowledge and experience from his present and past life gave him enough ability to play the role. Eliza extended her hand with delight, expressing that she was pleased to work with him. Ludger shook it, replying that it was his honor as well, though he told himself privately that he only had to endure 2 years. Surviving the period would be enough. Once free, he would disappear without looking back. Soon after, Ludger was escorted to the city. He settled into his assigned residence and reflected on his situation. The semester would begin in 3 weeks, which gave him time to prepare. He marveled at the house he had been given, a luxury he had not anticipated. Lying in his room, he acknowledged the irony of his life. He had been transported to this world 27 years earlier, carrying all his memories yet stripped of his abilities. He had survived by his own strength alone, without family support. Never had he imagined becoming a professor. This identity was not chosen but forced upon him, and yet it offered the cover he needed. The real Ludger Cherish had been the son of a fallen noble family from the small kingdom of Quoden. His parents had died long ago, leaving him without kin. The correspondence Ludger found confirmed the man had no close relations, which meant no one would expose the truth. It was a near-perfect identity. Rising from his seat, he reminded himself that his first duty was to study the academy grounds and prepare his lectures. Yet before he could begin, hunger struck. He realized he had not eaten since morning. Abandoning his plan, he decided to find food and postpone preparations until the next day. Time passed quickly, and within 2 weeks, he had studied the academy's system, learned essential details, and gathered material for his classes. He spent the final week practicing how to apply this knowledge in teaching. One evening, Ludger sat in a quiet establishment, reviewing documents while sipping from his cup. He noticed a young woman nearby, seated with her back to him. Without turning her head, she remarked that she was relieved he had survived. She confessed she had worried something might have happened to him during the attack. Ludger froze in silence, unsure how to respond. The woman continued, asking why he had not contacted them for 2 weeks. She mentioned that their organization had been anxious about him and even referred to him as the First Order. Ludger quietly drank from his cup again, offering no immediate reply. He finally acknowledged to himself that she was watching him and that her concern was not directed toward Gerald but toward Ludger Cherish. She lowered her gaze and admitted that the rebel attack had been unexpected, claiming none of them had foreseen it. Ludger asked instead for information about the academy. The woman appeared surprised, asking whether the data had not already been sent to him. He insisted that he needed to confirm the truth personally. She then realized his plan and conceded. The woman reported that their group had dealt with potential threats inside the academy and purged internal traitors, describing the cruel punishments inflicted. Ludger hid his distaste and kept calm, instructing her to continue. She apologized for her lack of thoroughness and admitted she should have confirmed details herself. He dismissed the concern, asking instead about her sudden appearance. She explained that he had been in the area for a month without making contact. He pointed out that acting alone drew unnecessary attention. Her sharp reaction confirmed her fear of him. Ludger pressed for numbers. She reported that 31 members from the Third Order and 7 from the Second had infiltrated, while the First Order was already in place. Ludger acknowledged the progress and stated that it was time to disperse. She agreed and asked him to use prearranged locations for future meetings. Ludger regarded her coldly, questioning whether she was attempting to give him orders. Ludger examined the letters he had discovered and gradually pieced together the identity of the man he was impersonating. The real Ludger Cherish had been a fallen nobleman without a family, recognized as the youngest mage of the 4th rank and recently appointed professor at an Academy. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he lowered his head, clenched his jaw in frustration, and pressed his hand to his brow. His irritation grew as he realized that he had failed to recognize the depth of the situation earlier. The true Ludger had been constructed to perfection, his background tailored so carefully that it would never raise suspicion. Only with such an identity could he have infiltrated the academy unnoticed. The letters appeared ordinary at first glance, yet Ludger sensed they were encrypted. He ran a hand across his face, cursed under his breath, and lay on the bed with closed eyes. A quiet admission followed that he had miscalculated, his haste leading him into far deeper complications than he had imagined. Rising again, he returned to the table and studied the letters more closely. The phrasing suggested that they had been written in the Quoden language, shaped with deliberate irregularities to disguise their meaning. Although he analyzed the peculiarities of the sentences, it never occurred to him that they belonged to the First Order, whose duty had been to infiltrate Sea or an academy, gain influence, and report progress to the organization. He set the letters aside and closed his eyes again, recognizing that the more he thought, the less believable the situation seemed. The head of such a secret order should not have perished so easily in a terrorist attack. Ludger reasoned that a figure of such strength ought to have survived. Nevertheless, judgment of the dead held no value, and he added the matter of the secret organization to the long list of burdens he carried. The more he considered the situation, the more he realized that renewed contact with members of the society was inevitable. From what the mysterious woman had explained, the group was divided into 4 orders. Ludger was aware of the first, second, and third orders, yet he suspected the hidden existence of a 0 order above them. He recognized the risk of exposure if another member of the First Order already knew Ludger cherished personally. His most urgent goal became avoiding discovery. He reasoned that Sea or an academy itself could serve as protection. No secret organization, however powerful, could withstand the authority and reach of such an institution. His plan was to gather information discreetly, playing both sides without revealing his true position. The thought of balancing these roles pressed heavily on him, and he sighed, realizing that 2 difficult years lay ahead. Time shifted forward as the academy prepared for a new semester. Students filled the corridors with animated conversations. Some gathered in the auditorium, settling into their seats as rumors circulated about the arrival of a new professor. One student claimed that a man would now be teaching spell theory and elemental visualization. Another remarked that he must have been chosen hastily because the previous professor had resigned unexpectedly. Among them, Flora, a blue-haired girl, turned at the sound of her peers discussing the matter. When another student scoffed that the new professor would likely fail just as the former had, Cheryl, her companion, suspected they were speaking about Flora. Flora admitted to herself that she had only exposed the weaknesses in her former professor's magical technique. Cheryl considered protesting yet remained silent. The conversation turned again as one student mentioned hearing of the newcomer's decorated military record, suggesting he was not a mere ordinary instructor but someone of reputation. Another claimed that he had once been a noble before his family's fall. The students concluded optimistically that such a man must be competent. Flora, however, lowered her gaze, privately dismissing their assumptions as shallow. At that moment, Ludger entered the classroom. He climbed the steps to the lectern and brought his palm firmly onto the table, commanding silence. He introduced himself as the new professor of spell theory and observation. The students froze, keeping their heads lowered. Ludger informed them that while their schedule had not yet been finalized, he had several important announcements to deliver before beginning instruction. He declared that his teaching would not remain confined to theory. The course would involve active practice, and students from both the first and second years would be included. Murmurs spread across the room until he raised his hand to restore quiet. He acknowledged their unease, assuring them that their academic load would not increase. A student raised a hand and asked why the classes had been combined. Ludger recognized the speaker, a blonde girl with sharp green eyes, though he could not recall from where. He explained that his role as an educator was to provide value equally, regardless of level, and that his lessons would not resemble the predictable lectures they had experienced before. When she pressed for more detail, he declined, saying that discovery would come only with participation. He then warned them sternly. Anyone who believed they could obtain high grades without effort under his instruction would be disappointed. His gaze swept across the students, who sat uneasily. Inwardly he hoped fewer would remain, reasoning that smaller classes would ease his work. The lecture concluded with his announcement that the semester was officially open. The students, intimidated by his presence, refrained from asking questions despite their curiosity. Flora quietly touched her chin, smiling faintly as though she had discerned something personal. Ludger left the classroom and walked through the corridor, satisfied that his authority had been established. Yet his satisfaction faltered when he considered that the students had remained silent out of wounded pride. For a brief moment he wondered whether his approach had been too harsh. As he walked, he noticed the students parting in front of him, stepping aside to clear his path. He considered whether this was respect or fear, before being distracted by a voice that greeted him. He turned to find Selena, who introduced herself as another newcomer to the academy. She expressed her pleasure in meeting him and mentioned that it was also her first day at work. Ludger returned the courtesy and asked if she had something in mind. Selena nodded and inquired if he had already eaten lunch. Outside the academy, Ludger was greeted by Brino, who expressed his pleasure at meeting him. Brino was responsible for teaching students the art of summoning golems. Standing beside him was Marita, who introduced herself with calm confidence. She explained that her specialty lay in charms, illusions, curse removal, and dispelling magic. Ludger returned their greetings, provided his name, and stated that he taught both the theory and practice of spells. He wondered briefly whether this gathering had been arranged as a way for the new professors to become better acquainted with one another. Brino and Marita remarked on his appearance, noting that he looked just as striking up close as he did from afar. Ludger acknowledged the compliment with a polite nod. Not far away, a young man wearing glasses observed him with evident displeasure. Feeling the weight of the gaze, Ludger turned his head and caught the man's expression, only for him to quickly avert his eyes. Marita lowered her voice and explained that the man was Professor Chris Benamor. He had been the first among them to join the academy, and as far as she knew, he came from a noble family, unlike the rest of them, who were commoners. Ludger understood at once. Within this group of newly appointed professors, there was one nobleman and 3 commoners. Regardless of their differing social status, each of them was recognized as highly skilled in their respective fields. Yet Ludger noted to himself that there could easily be another member of the First Order hiding among them. He reflected that Chris's earlier arrival at the academy held no real significance, and trusting the words of colleagues without proof would be unwise. Chris, visibly irritated, exhaled sharply and declared that he could not remain there any longer. He admitted that curiosity had drawn him to meet the new professors, but in his opinion, they turned out to be little more than commoners or disgraced nobles. He warned that if any incident were to occur, he would stand apart from them. His words carried a particular edge when directed at Ludger, accusing him of pretending to be someone important. Marita frowned in indignation, pointing out that Chris's noble status gave him no right to speak down to them. She urged Ludger not to take the insult to heart. Ludger, however, responded with calm detachment. If Chris chose to separate himself, then they could simply proceed without him. Selena and Brino voiced their agreement, deciding it was better that way. As Ludger followed the group, he thought privately that he might appreciate some company at dinner. As the evening drew closer, students gathered in their dormitories and exchanged information through the academy's communication panel. One student asked if anyone had heard about the new professor named Ludger. The responses spread quickly. Some claimed that he was the youngest mage to reach the 4th rank, that he had served as a military officer, and that he had participated in cryptid hunting. Others added that he was registered as an independent magic specialist within the Wizard's Tower. The question was raised whether all this could truly be accurate. Among them, a girl typed decisively into the panel, vowing not to allow Ludger's first lesson to be a failure. She resolved to gather as many students as possible to attend. Others, upon seeing her message, expressed surprise and asked if freshmen would also be allowed to join. The idea intrigued them, and soon many decided to give it a try. The following morning, Ludger walked along the academy's corridors, contemplating his first lecture. He wondered how many students would choose to remain, since he had warned in advance that his lessons would be rigorous. His best estimate was that no more than 30 would stay. Arriving at the lecture hall, he was met with unexpected silence. Every student turned their eyes toward him. His own gaze swept across the seats, and to his astonishment, all 80 were filled. He was even more surprised to notice that the number of first-year students exceeded that of the second years. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly the moment he entered. The students whispered that he must truly have been in the military, given the weight of his presence. Ludger wondered if it was intimidating for first years to sit alongside seniors, but he also suspected that someone had set a trap. His irritation surfaced briefly, though he dismissed the thought. Perhaps he had simply underestimated their determination. As he approached the podium, he reflected that Seoran Academy attracted the most talented students from across the continent. It was only natural that their competitive spirits would be stirred. Lowering his hand, Ludger accepted the situation. He introduced himself formally, announcing that he intended to teach them everything there was to know about spells. A student cautiously raised his hand and asked if that meant Ludger would be covering all 4 learning profiles. Ludger cast a displeased look at the interruption, remarking that he had not yet permitted questions. However, he decided to be lenient. The student lowered his hand quickly, and Ludger warned that anyone who disrupted class or challenged his authority would have their points reduced, though such points could later be regained. Since the question had been raised, he answered it. His lessons would indeed cover all 4 profiles: release, elemental magic, telekinesis, and fortification. Flora, resting her chin on her hand, commented that most professors limited themselves to 2 profiles, yet Ludger planned to attempt all 4. She considered the challenge excessive. Determined to capture their interest, Ludger raised his wand and focused his magic. A 3rd-tier spell, Trembling Flame, took shape before them. He explained that it was based on release magic, combining 7 distinct components: heat, ignition, compression, expansion, dispersion, and acceleration, and that it could be executed 3 times faster than modern methods. The students exchanged skeptical whispers. Cheryl turned to Flora and asked if she believed it was possible. Flora admitted her doubts. She thought it was impossible to alter the basic structure of a spell, though she acknowledged the existence of scrolls and mnemonic techniques. Yet, if Ludger relied on such methods, she would lose all respect for him. Ludger left the flame hovering beside him and invited further questions. Alex, a second-year student, asked how the method could truly be faster. Ludger explained that it reduced casting time, then permitted the next question. Dahlia, a first-year, asked whether he had restructured an existing spell. Ludger clarified that modifying a technique created an entirely new spell. His goal was to preserve the original form while teaching them how to accelerate the process. Finally, Flora raised her hand and declared with conviction that what Ludger claimed was impossible. Ludger froze at Flora's words and studied her with careful eyes. His silence made the students murmur among themselves, believing that it was now her turn to challenge him. Some even whispered that he should be cautious. Eventually, Ludger remarked that he had only allowed questions, but since Flora had spoken, he would listen. He asked why she was so certain of her claim. Flora explained that in order to cast a spell more quickly using established methods, one needed relentless practice and mastery. She questioned whether Ludger truly believed he could accomplish something that even prodigies could not, declaring that she did not believe him. Ludger rested his hand on his chin thoughtfully before asking what would happen if geniuses were capable of it but had never attempted. Puzzled, Flora pressed him to clarify. Ludger stated that the development of magic had stagnated because it had become constrained by tradition and history, while science had continued to progress and was now nearly equal with magic. He stressed that he did not regard science as superior, but rather wished to point out that magic still held vast untapped potential. For this reason, he said Flora's statement was mistaken. If no one else dared to attempt progress, then he would take the first step. Flora frowned and accused him of arrogance, claiming he had lost all sense of balance. Ludger gestured toward the spell and remarked that it would be difficult to explain in words. Instead, he requested her permission to demonstrate. Before doing so, he asked if she knew the average time required to create the trembling flame. Flora replied that it depended on the mage's skill. A mage at the third rank would require about 10 seconds, while a higher rank mage could achieve it in 5. Ludger admitted this was correct but argued that rank was not the only factor, suggesting that the students present could serve as examples. Flora answered that in such a case it would take at least 5 seconds, though she could manage faster. Her confidence impressed him, and he invited her to step forward and demonstrate. Flora accepted and moved to the front. Extending her hand, she gathered magical energy, shaping it into the trembling flame with smooth precision. The students gasped at her speed, immediately recalling that she was a daughter of the distinguished Lumos family. Ludger checked his watch and noted that she had finished in 4 seconds and 78 milliseconds. He found it difficult to believe she was only a sophomore, for her performance had been flawless. Still, Flora insisted that there was nothing remarkable about it. Ludger declared that her result was too slow. Confused, Flora asked what he meant. He replied that the record time for a third-rank mage stood at 4 seconds and 41 hundredths. Her result was close, yet still behind. Flora countered that with practice she could improve, but Ludger stated firmly that even 4.41 seconds was far too long. The students were stunned and questioned whether he was serious, speculating about how quickly he could perform the spell. Holding his wand, Ludger urged them to watch carefully. A surge of magical energy erupted from it, and within an instant the circle was complete. The spell formed before him so quickly that Flora and the others were frozen in shock. It had taken him a single second, though it felt like less. Flora stared, realizing that he had altered the very structure of the technique. Ludger asked if they had observed it clearly and repeated the spell once more. This time the students were utterly speechless. He then revealed that his time had been precisely 0.24 seconds, shattering the known record. He admitted that the spell might have looked unusual the first time because he had applied a different technique, yet the essence of the trembling flame had not changed. He explained that he had simply used one method to create another. The students asked what that meant. Ludger clarified by comparing it to programming. The magician's body served as equipment, while magical energy functioned as data. Techniques acted as programs, activating magic as software, which he referred to as the source code. Flora repeated the phrase in her mind, struck by its unfamiliarity, and wondered who Ludger truly was. When his gaze fell upon her, she admitted quietly that his explanation made sense. Ludger reminded her that she had interrupted the class due to her own prejudice. He asked if she agreed, and Flora lowered her head in acknowledgement. He then reprimanded her, calling her actions thoughtless and rude, and deducted 10 points from her record. The class fell into silence, shocked that he would punish her. Flora clenched her jaw but accepted it, turning to return to her seat. Before she could, Ludger acknowledged that her demonstration had been flawless and restored the 10 points, praising her diligence. Flora bowed her head slightly and thanked him, hiding her emotions. A student asked if the penalty had truly been removed, and another admitted relief at the outcome. Returning to her seat, Flora was met by Cheryl, who asked how she felt. Flora reassured her that she was fine and thanked her for the concern. Cheryl smiled, convinced that Flora had handled matters well, though she sensed Flora's frustration. Ludger removed his coat and hung it neatly, warning the class that what they had witnessed was merely the introduction. Now the true lesson would begin. He announced that he would teach basic techniques only to those who listened carefully, urging them all to strive. Some looked at him with determination, others with unease. He proceeded with the lecture, captivating the room. Among the students, Aiden reflected on his earlier doubts, realizing how wrong he had been. At first he believed the stories about Ludger were exaggerated, but now he understood why Seoran Academy was so renowned. His admiration grew, and he smiled with respect. When the lesson concluded, Ludger dismissed the students and instructed them to review the material at home. As they departed, Aiden whispered in awe that Ludger was beyond incredible, marveling at having witnessed something like the source code. Another student scoffed, dismissing the idea and claiming such beliefs only revealed the weakness of common people. In his mind, there was no place for the ordinary in this academy. Aiden looked confused and turned toward the other students, who had already lost interest and returned to their own business. Scratching the back of his head, he wondered if the angry boy had really been speaking to him. He tried to apologize, yet the blonde bully, already irritated, demanded to know if Aiden was mocking him. Aiden quickly clarified that he had no such intention. Nevertheless, the blonde's pride was wounded. He accused Aiden of daring to look down on the eldest son of Baron Pelliot. A murmur rippled through the students. Someone mentioned the Pelliot name and asked if the family's estate lay near the far border of the empire. Another suggested that Seoran Academy must now be accepting children if such heirs were entering. Leo, a blue-haired student nearby, remarked that admitting sons of weak noble families was far worse. The blonde gritted his teeth at the insult. He pulled out his wand and demanded respect. Calling both Aiden and Leo fools, he insisted they would pay for insulting a noble. Leo, however, remained calm and told him to try if he dared. The blonde hesitated, unprepared for resistance. Leo repeated his challenge and advised him to think carefully, reminding him that the academy would not ignore reckless violence no matter his status. He urged the bully to look around. When the blonde turned, he noticed other students whispering and watching intently. Realizing he was being judged, the bully muttered in frustration and stalked away toward the exit. Aiden breathed a sigh of relief and thanked Leo for stepping in. He introduced himself and waited for the other boy's response. Leo gave his name but insisted that gratitude was unnecessary, since he only acted out of irritation at the blonde's arrogance. Aiden remarked that Leo seemed like a good person and asked if he had heard everything during the exchange. Leo eventually agreed to walk with him. Aiden cheerfully declared that he would go along wherever Leo was headed, but Leo admitted he had no idea where that might be. Aiden then asked if the books he carried were for alchemy, explaining that he was on his way to an alchemy class. Leo sighed and allowed it, cautioning Aiden not to draw attention. Puzzled, Aiden asked what he meant. Leo explained that as a country boy and a commoner, Aiden would have difficulty blending in among students of noble birth. Aiden was surprised it was so obvious, since he had not even realized it himself. Leo continued, stressing that Aiden needed to understand the academy's social structure, especially in the second year. Certain students held high influence and reputation. The first was Flora Lumos, whom Aiden recalled seeing speak during the earlier lecture. Leo confirmed this and warned that Flora was serious and difficult to approach. He explained that the previous professor of magical theory and practice had resigned because of her. The second was Arender von Exilian, the third princess of the empire, whose presence in class Aiden had already noticed. Leo emphasized that commoners like them should not get involved with royalty. The third was Freuden Wolberg, who led the most prominent group of second-year nobles. Aiden recalled the family name as one of the empire's most powerful. He also realized with annoyance that the foolish Pelliot heir was one of Freuden's companions. Accepting this as unavoidable, Aiden asked if there were more notable figures. Leo hesitated, unsure if Aiden was joking, but promised to explain further later. Pleased, Aiden invited him to lunch, unaware that another student nearby was observing them carefully. Meanwhile, Ludger walked down the academy corridor, reflecting on the earlier lecture. The student's enthusiasm had exceeded his expectations. Considering the world resembled the 19th century of Earth, where science progressed slowly despite magic, he had not anticipated such strong reactions. By merging magic with scientific principles, he had created what he called the source code. Its effectiveness had impressed the students more than he predicted. His old mentor had once remarked that results mattered most, and Ludger now understood that truth clearly. The method allowed rapid, precise spellcasting within the third rank, though complex in nature. He knew he could not reveal everything about the source code to his students, so he prepared additional techniques to prevent suspicion. Approaching a door, he wondered if it belonged to his new office. Upon entering, he was surprised to find Eliza waiting. Eliza welcomed him warmly and asked his thoughts about the office. Ludger, astonished by her unexpected presence, remained silent. She explained that each professor received a private space for personal use. As he sat opposite her, he asked why she had come. She teased him for questioning her presence but eventually admitted she wished to see how he was settling in. She reminded him that as rector, she was obliged to watch over all professors. Their eyes met briefly, and Ludger sensed a strange tension, though he maintained his composure. Eliza noted his calmness, confessing that she had expected him to be more unsettled. Ludger replied that he had faced enough surprises already. Eliza explained that she had visited the other professors before him and saved him for last, which made him wonder if she suspected something. He understood that someone in her position would quickly notice inconsistencies. She mentioned hearing that he had invited first-year students into his lectures. He confirmed it, clarifying that he did not believe in separating by year. To his surprise, she approved, praising his openness and recognizing that new students included remarkable talents. She then reminded him discreetly that one of the students was a princess and warned him not to create unnecessary complications. Ludger, hearing this for the first time, was startled. Eliza reassured him that she had confidence in his abilities and congratulated him for the success of his first class. She declined his offer of tea, saying she had more matters to attend to. Outside the office, Eliza paused in thought. Wolford approached and asked how the meeting had gone. He wanted to know whether Ludger could be trusted. Eliza admitted uncertainty, explaining that she usually monitored those who drew her suspicion, but Ludger had revealed nothing definitive. Wolford replied that her instincts were rarely wrong, and if she remained involved, clarity would come. Eliza confessed that Ludger intrigued her, since even her magical gaze failed to rattle him. She judged his willpower unusually strong. Considering the recent terrorist incident on the train and the possibility of infiltration at the academy, she suspected that the man before her might not even be the real Ludger. Wolford admitted he could not be certain, but his intuition told him Ludger was no ordinary figure. Eliza agreed, deciding to keep a close watch on him for now. Ludger sat in his office and exhaled heavily as he leaned back in his chair. The recent meeting had felt less like a discussion and more like an interrogation, and he understood that such private encounters needed to be avoided in the future. Eliza's probing eyes had lingered on him throughout, and though her suspicion was evident, he reminded himself that he had nothing concrete to be accused of. His path forward was to remain steady and continue with his duties as professor. He turned his attention to the roster of students. His gaze paused when he spotted the name Flora Lumos. A small frown crossed his face as he considered the weight of the Lumos family, one of the most influential among the nobility. For a brief moment, he questioned whether recent circumstances could entangle him with unnecessary trouble. The thought pressed at him, but he reassured himself that Flora likely had not taken his words from before too seriously, especially since he had even gone so far as to award her extra points in an attempt to smooth over their earlier conflict. He recalled Eliza's comment regarding the exceptional number of talented students. As he studied the list, he realized her words were not exaggerated. From the first-year prodigy recommended by the Magic Tower to the princess of the Exilian Empire, the group was filled with rare ability. His attention halted again when he reached Aiden. He asked himself if this was the student Eliza had mentioned, the one possessing a unique type of magic. The name stirred faint recognition, though the memory refused to surface clearly. He flipped through the documents, deciding that the exact recollection could wait, though he knew enough to remain cautious. Eliza's expression earlier made it obvious that she did not yet place full trust in him. The thought of trust pulled him into darker considerations. He remembered the name whispered by a girl not long ago, the First Order. She had called it a secret organization and had hinted at its influence. His brow furrowed as he considered the possibility that she had recognized him back at the train, perhaps even unmasking his altered appearance. His thoughts trailed further toward the skills of the real Ludger, who had been a master of infiltration and disguise. Perhaps that was the role he was meant to maintain now. The line of thought unsettled him, and he dismissed it with a sharp shake of his head. Aligning too closely with such an organization carried risks beyond repair. There was no assurance that the group would protect him if exposed. His only choice was to fulfill his role as a professor and keep his position intact. A sudden knock broke through his thoughts. He stiffened, then opened the door to find a postman waiting with documents. The man explained that the duty schedule was being delivered, specifying that it was Luger's turn today. Ludger accepted the papers, recalling that something of this sort had been written into his contract. Once the postman took his leave, Ludger skimmed the schedule and noted with some relief that the task appeared simple. Later, in the academy's training hall, the air was filled with the sound of practice and chatter among students. A heated exchange drew attention when Dwinema, a blonde noble, demanded that another student repeat her words. The other girl, a silver-haired commoner, stated firmly that she had the right to remain in the hall since it was a public space. She countered that if Dwinema disliked her presence, then she was free to leave instead. Dwinema's face tightened with disdain as she asked how a commoner dared show such boldness. The silver-haired girl responded that in Seorin Academy all were equal regardless of background, and that status carried no privilege within these grounds. Dwinema scoffed, implying that such declarations only served to comfort those of lesser birth. Her companions laughed, mocking the idea that commoners could elevate themselves beyond their place. The silver-haired girl pressed her lips together and chose silence. Dwinema, unsatisfied, demanded an apology. When none came, the girl turned her back and walked away. Rage flared in Dwinema's expression. She raised her wand, sending a magical attack toward the retreating student. Her friends recoiled at the sudden escalation, while the target could only cry out helplessly. Before the spell could strike, a radiant flash tore through the attack, nullifying it. Displeasure filled Dwinema's eyes as she turned to see who had interfered. Ludger descended into the scene, stating coldly that the school year had barely begun and already discipline was faltering. To him, it was an insult to the academy's reputation. The silver-haired student's eyes widened in recognition, while Dwinema flinched beneath his gaze. Ludger reminded them that Seorin's rules applied equally to all, regardless of origin. He pointed out that what had occurred was not a duel but a one-sided assault. Dwinema attempted to defend herself, insisting she was upholding her family's honor. Ludger dismissed the claim, repeating that no status could justify attacking a peer. He ordered her to follow him at once. At that moment, Dwinema lost her composure entirely. In her fury, she spat out words that revealed her scorn, calling him a fallen noble unworthy of respect. The words hung in the air, and Ludger froze. Dwinema herself faltered as she realized what she had said. One of her friends tried to call her back, but she remained silent. The silver-haired student stood still as well, confused by the sudden tension. Ludger turned his gaze back to Dwinema. His voice cut through the hall as he demanded she repeat her words. The weight of his presence pressed against her like a storm. A menacing aura radiated from him, and Dwinema trembled as the air around her grew heavy with the pressure of his authority. Ludger once again demanded that the words be repeated. The gray-haired student was struck silent, unable to process what had just occurred, while Dwinema trembled with fear and could not muster a response. Stepping closer, Ludger looked at her directly and asked if she truly believed he was nothing more than an insignificant fallen nobleman. At that moment, Selena entered the training hall, guided by another student. She frowned as she saw the tense atmosphere. Professor Marita, who had been overseeing the session, raised her hand and called Ludger forward. Observing his movement, many assumed he would strike Dwinema, who had already closed her eyes tightly in anticipation. However, Ludger did nothing of the sort. Instead, he calmly placed his hand on Dwinema's shoulder. His composure startled both her and Selena, who froze as she watched. Ludger acknowledged that Dwinema had indeed noticed something accurately. He admitted he was a fallen noble. Yet, as he reminded everyone, they were in Seorin Academy, where he served as a professor. By pointing that out, he emphasized that her words had attempted to undermine his authority within this institution. He asked if she understood the seriousness of this, but Dwinema lowered her head, unable to reply. Noting her silence, Ludger mentioned that she was still new to the academy and that adapting to the environment could be difficult. He stated they would consider her words as nothing more than a careless slip of the tongue. Although she would not face heavy consequences this time, he warned that disciplinary action would still be taken for her disrespectful behavior toward a classmate. Ludger then turned to Lin and asked if she had been harmed. Lin assured him that she was fine. Hearing this, Ludger expressed satisfaction before turning to Selena, instructing her to take charge of the students. Selena agreed, and without further words, Ludger departed from the hall. As he left, Lin pressed her hand against her chest, her mind reeling. She was astonished that Ludger had remembered her name. She was merely a commoner, no different from many others, and had not expected him to recall her presence from class. She repeated to herself what he had once declared, that within Seorin Academy, all stood as equals. Lin smiled faintly at that thought. Perhaps the professor was not as cold and intimidating as she had first believed. In that moment, she felt a budding sense of trust, along with the determination to follow his example. Placing her palms to her cheeks, she resolved to study harder than before. Later that evening, Ludger sat alone on a bench outside. His head hung low, his face twisted with pain. He clenched his jaw as disturbing sounds echoed inside his mind. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a small flask, poured a few tablets into his palm, and swallowed them quickly. Gradually, the sharp pain began to ease. He contemplated how he would manage without the medicine. The timing of these attacks unsettled him deeply. Earlier, he had nearly revealed his weakness before others. The symptoms had begun the moment he entered the training ground. He had managed to suppress them for a while, yet they worsened until he almost lost control. He recalled how Dwinema's outburst had forced him to remain, when he should have left earlier. Looking at the now empty flask, Ludger realized it had been his last bottle. By his calculations, only about 5 days' supply remained. If necessary, he would be forced to rely on magic again. However, seeking a pharmacy prescription was far too dangerous, so he decided he needed to contact someone trustworthy soon. Sometime later, he asked Selena about the report she mentioned. She confirmed that it was about a werewolf. According to her, students had seen a dark figure perched atop a building in the city the previous night. Ludger initially dismissed it as another ghost tale, yet Selena insisted there had been multiple witnesses, some even claiming to have seen the creature near Seoran Academy itself. Although it might have been something else, she said the most likely explanation was indeed a werewolf. Within the magical world of Seoran, such anomalies were not entirely unusual. Legends even spoke of 7 ghosts haunting the academy. Selena closed her eyes and asked if Ludger truly had not heard of this before. Ludger thought to himself that she seemed remarkably well versed in ghost stories. When he questioned her, Selena quickly waved her hands and explained that she had not gone looking for such information on purpose. Marita then interjected, recalling how she had heard Ludger demonstrate an unusual technique during his first lesson. She noted that it had been something entirely new, a method that could greatly shorten the process of spellcasting, and she asked what it was called. Before Ludger could reply, Selena answered for him, explaining that it was the source code. Their discussion drew curious looks from passing professors. Marita pressed further, confirming the truth of the rumor. Ludger acknowledged it, and Selena admitted she still could not believe such a spell existed. Marita remarked that others would surely want to learn his secret, since rumors spread quickly. Ludger reflected quietly, realizing how intently the other professors were watching. He recognized the danger of revealing too much. Selena suggested the magic tower could even grant him a patent, but Ludger dismissed the idea, thinking to himself that patents would only attract more enemies. Already, their stares felt like blades. Among the crowd, he noticed Chris glaring at him. The intensity of Chris's gaze felt as though it could pierce him. Shaking his head, Ludger recalled the werewolf again. Night soon descended. In the city streets, Ludger moved silently, considering his next steps. Suddenly, a hulking monster landed behind him. Half man and half beast, the werewolf lunged with a powerful swipe of its claw. Ludger evaded effortlessly, countering with a swift kick that sent the creature crashing into the ground. It roared in fury as the dust settled. The werewolf cursed, complaining that too much time had passed, and sarcastically asked if Ludger could at least pretend to be surprised. Rising to its feet, the creature finally revealed itself as Hans, addressing Ludger as his elder. Ludger narrowed his eyes, recognizing the familiar presence. Once again, Hans had returned to cause trouble, and Ludger silently wondered what mischief he had stirred up this time. Hans spoke with irritation, asking if Ludger truly believed this was the outcome he wanted. He admitted that he never expected the dog, which had just been in the woman's arms, to suddenly leap down and attack him. Ludger covered his mouth with one hand, trying to contain his amusement at the sight, while Hans looked indignant. He declared that in his place, Ludger would not have laughed, and he wondered aloud if he might have been cursed. Ludger studied him with a calm gaze, recalling Hans's unusual nature. Despite being human, Hans possessed one peculiar trait. Whenever he was bitten by an animal, he would instantly absorb its genes and transform into that creature, whether he wished for it or not. Hans demanded if Ludger had brought the antidote. Ludger nodded and revealed a syringe. Taking it gratefully, Hans injected the medicine into his arm, remarking that he could not remain in his current state any longer. His body slowly shifted back to its human form, and he acknowledged that without Ludger, he would have been forced to endure this transformation for several more days. The sight reminded Ludger of the first time they had met, when he had been tasked with capturing a cryptid. Instead of the terrifying creature he expected, he found himself facing a gigantic chihuahua. Hans, remembering as well, expressed his relief that Ludger had figured things out back then, since otherwise the situation would have ended poorly for him. Hans began to speak again, but Ludger cut him off, reminding him that his name was now Ludger. Hans froze, clutching his neck as he recalled hearing that Ludger had become a professor at Seoran Academy. He muttered to himself, wondering when Luger's personality had changed so drastically. He could not understand why they were meeting in Rebirth instead of the capital, nor how circumstances had reached this point. When Luger explained his story, Hans burst out laughing. He found it incredible that Luger had managed to conceal himself so thoroughly, since in his place, he would have given himself away instantly. He asked if Luger was affiliated with a secret organization. Luger confirmed this, recalling that his order was known as the First Order. Hans crossed his arms and repeated the name, his expression thoughtful. Luger, placing a finger on his chin, asked if it meant anything to him. Hans admitted that he had heard of it before, adding that some fugitives pursued by the order had recently taken refuge in the dungeon. Certain they were the ones in question, Luger asked their name. Hans replied that they were called the Black Dawn, noting that Luger was fortunate to have survived. If he had made a single mistake, his cover would have been blown. Luger closed his eyes briefly, acknowledging the truth of that. He knew he needed to prepare carefully. He then asked Hans if he had brought the suitcase he requested. Hans handed it over, assuring him that he had not looked inside. Even if he had wanted to, the suitcase could not have been opened by him. Luger opened it, confirming its contents, and noted silently that they both needed medicine. He then questioned Hans about why he had written in his letter that they should wait 2 days before meeting. Hans looked puzzled, insisting that he had never written such a thing. Luger reminded him that he had heard rumors of a werewolf 2 days earlier. Hans explained that he had only arrived in Rebirth that day and saw no reason why he would have delayed their meeting. The two fell silent, until a sudden sharp noise echoed nearby. Hans flinched while Luger stiffened, his brow furrowing in concentration. Hans broke the silence, asking if the sound came from the same creature. Luger confirmed it. In the distance, a dark silhouette stood atop a roof. Its menacing growl confirmed it was indeed a werewolf. Hans cursed, realizing that the rumors were true. He suggested they leave quickly, but Luger refused. Any movement risked being discovered. He suspected the beast was on the hunt. As Luger studied the creature, he noticed a pendant glittering at its neck. He concluded it was placed there deliberately and decided it needed to be examined. Opening the suitcase, he pulled out one of his devices. Hans asked who could have created such a thing. Luger replied calmly that they would uncover the truth soon, loading his weapon. Hans remarked that it had been a long time since he had seen Luger fire a shot, not since the days when he hunted cryptids. Back then, Luger had carried a different name. As Hans searched his memory, he recalled it at last, Abraham Van Helsing. As Luger stepped forward, the werewolf turned and noticed him. The beast bared its fangs and leapt, landing directly in front of him. Luger remained composed, his eyes fixed steadily on the creature. He confirmed his suspicion that something bound the monster's neck. The werewolf struck, yet Luger parried the blow with ease. As he moved, faint magic circles flared beneath his steps. The beast pressed forward with relentless attacks, but Luger evaded each strike smoothly, retreating until his back touched the wall. The werewolf charged again, but Luger did not flinch. A faint smile appeared on his face as the magic circles ignited. The circles shot upward, enclosing the werewolf. The beast roared in pain, clutching at its head. Hans stared in shock, wondering if it had eaten something spoiled. Luger explained calmly that he had released an ultrasonic signal inaudible to human ears, shattering the werewolf's senses. There was no need for a silver bullet tonight. Drawing a syringe, Luger prepared to discover the creature's origin. Before he could act, distant voices ordered one another to hurry. Recognizing the approach of the authorities, Luger cursed. The werewolf seized the moment to leap back onto the roof. Luger launched his grappling hook, pulling himself up with determination. This time, he resolved, the creature would not escape. The police quickly noticed a figure moving on the rooftops and ordered their men to detain anyone who seemed suspicious. Meanwhile, Luger continued his relentless pursuit of the werewolf. His strides carried him swiftly across the rooftops, his pace steady and precise. The beast leapt from one building to another, its movements raw and powerful. Yet, to its surprise, Luger was already positioned ahead, blocking its path. At that moment, Luger reflected on his intentions. He had only wished to subdue the creature without resorting to killing, but the situation left him with no other choice. With a heavy sigh, he drew out his shuriken, his expression tightening in focus. The werewolf bared its teeth, snarling before launching itself toward him. Luger threw the shuriken, his eyes locked on the beast's every move. The creature dodged swiftly and continued forward. However, the weapon curved in midair and returned, forcing the werewolf to dodge again. Catching the shuriken with ease, Luger noted silently that the beast's reflexes were far sharper than expected. Shifting his grip on his cane, Luger concentrated. He resolved to end the battle with a single decisive strike. Channeling a surge of magical energy into the weapon, he released it toward the monster. The air trembled as the force shot forward, causing the beast to roar in fury. Ludger used the opening, gliding past the creature and striking it on the head from behind. Seizing the moment, he pressed forward, but the werewolf retaliated quickly, forcing him to retreat with a swift leap backward. The fight escalated as Ludger launched his shuriken again. This time, the werewolf failed to avoid the attack, howling in pain as the weapon cut into its flesh. Ludger immediately followed up, leaping into the air and bringing his cane down in a powerful strike. Yet, the monster caught the weapon between its jaws at the last moment. Unfazed, Ludger detached the cane, revealing a dagger hidden within. With swift precision, he avoided the beast's snapping jaws and struck. The werewolf's eyes widened in shock as the blade flashed. In a single motion, Ludger severed its head, ending the fight. Elsewhere in the city, Hans walked the streets, muttering curses under his breath as he recalled how narrowly he had avoided capture. He thought about Ludger's hunt for the werewolf, irritation building as he wondered where his companion was now. Suddenly, his steps faltered when something landed before him with a dull thud. His eyes widened in horror at the sight of the bloodied head rolling at his feet. Trembling, he screamed. Ludger descended gracefully from above, landing in front of him with a smirk. Hans, still shaking, cursed at him for the sudden fright and complained that he should have at least given a warning. Gathering himself, Hans asked if this was truly the same werewolf they had encountered earlier and begged Ludger not to say he planned to leave the head lying there. Ludger explained calmly that he had already learned all he needed from it and had no use for it anymore. Hans demanded to know why he had carried the head around at all, only to stare in disbelief when Ludger admitted he simply wished to surprise him. Annoyed, Hans asked if this was really his idea of repayment. Ludger, ignoring the complaint, revealed that the creature had not been a natural cryptid but an artificially created one. This revelation convinced him they had to proceed carefully with their plans. He suggested they settle temporarily in Rebirth, noting it would be more advantageous than staying in the capital. Hans, taken aback, reminded him that the city was full of secret groups, unhinged scientists, and gangs. Ludger calmly concluded that this was precisely why it was ideal, as such chaos made it harder for anyone to track them down. He instructed Hans to gather information, since his own movements were restricted due to being monitored, and to keep him updated regularly. His fears soon proved correct. Reports spread that an unknown killer was active in Rebirth. 5 murders occurred the previous Sunday, bringing the death toll to 10. Witnesses described a beast with black fur, though the police dismissed it as a madman they would eventually catch. Reading the account in the newspaper, Ludger realized uneasily that the timing contradicted his own actions. He had disposed of the werewolf on Saturday, yet attacks occurred the next day. While he pondered this, the crystal sphere nearby glowed suddenly, breaking his thoughts. Soon after, the professors gathered in the academy hall. When Ludger entered, Selina gestured for him to join her at an empty table. The other professors whispered about him, debating rumors of his past as a fallen aristocrat and marveling over his supposed inventions. Ludger ignored their chatter and calmly sat beside Selina. She quickly informed him of troubling news. 2 first-year students had been attacked the previous night. Though they survived, their injuries bore the marks of claws. When they awoke, they described a terrifying beast. Selina concluded that the recent rumors were true and noted casualties in Rebirth as well. Before Ludger could reply, silence fell as Eliza entered with authority. Selina quietly explained that the woman beside her was Marie Ross, a respected professor of pharmacology with decades of service. After Marie greeted Eliza, the headmistress announced the urgent reason for their meeting. A criminal was active within the academy, and 2 students had already been seriously injured. Witnesses claimed the culprit was a werewolf. One professor, Hugo Bertego, stood to object. He insisted such a thing was impossible and dismissed the claims as baseless. Eliza narrowed her eyes and questioned him directly. Hugo argued that the academy was under imperial protection and that it was foolish to believe student tales about monsters. Eliza reminded him firmly that there were already 2 victims, but Hugo countered that this was why he doubted the presence of a werewolf. He stressed that the injured students were of noble blood, and therefore the culprit must be one of the commoners. Eliza, displeasure evident on her face, asked Ludger to repeat his words. Hugo interjected, questioning whether she truly did not consider the possibility that commoners were behind the attacks. He pointed out that only nobles had been targeted and expressed doubt that Eliza genuinely believed in the existence of werewolves. He suggested it was more likely someone was impersonating the creatures. Several professors, including Chris, chuckled quietly at his remark. Meanwhile, Ludger remained silent with his arms folded, deep in thought. He reflected on how he had initially assumed that Black Dawn would falter quickly, yet it now became clear that he had miscalculated. Some individuals were intentionally provoking rebellion at a time when unity was most critical. The realization left him questioning whether this was truly the state of the continent's most prestigious academy. His thoughts were interrupted when he felt something fall on his shoulder. Glancing down, he noticed a small insect. He frowned, picked it up, and crushed it between his fingers. To his surprise, a folded piece of paper appeared in his palm. Unfolding it, he read a message stating that 3 experimental specimens had escaped. The note instructed that they be captured alive if possible, but if not, eliminated immediately, as they posed a threat to the sender. Ludger studied the note, then lowered his head, closed his eyes, and clenched his fist. The constant trials he was forced to endure weighed heavily on him. Selena, noticing his expression, asked if he was feeling well. He brushed aside her concern, assuring her he was fine. Internally, he understood that this matter was directly tied to Black Dawn, and even they had not anticipated such disastrous consequences. Their shaken position pleased him, yet he also realized he could not allow anyone to uncover his secret. He needed to act before the Academy discovered the escaped experiments, for if they did, his plans would unravel. Eliza raised her hand, stating that Hugo had the right to express his opinion, but urged him to focus on their duties. She inquired about tightening security, to which Hugo agreed. Eliza confirmed she would enforce stricter measures and ordered the professors to instruct students not to wander at night. She added that penalty points could be used as punishment, making her instructions an official order. Hugo acknowledged her decision, and Eliza concluded the meeting by wishing everyone productive work. Later, Ludger walked down a quiet street. He suddenly halted and called out to a girl hiding behind a tree, urging her to step forward. Startled, she hesitated before slowly emerging, her lips pressed tightly together. She lowered her head in embarrassment yet stood at her full height before him. Ludger recognized her as the girl who had once addressed him as First Order. Now disguised as a student, she seemed anxious. When Ludger asked what was wrong, she struggled to form words. Ludger suggested they speak in a quieter place and invited her to follow. She agreed, and he unexpectedly asked if she wanted coffee. Surprised, she froze and asked him to repeat the question. Soon afterward, they were seated inside a coffee shop. The girl kept her head lowered, reluctant to begin the conversation. Ludger asked her name, and she introduced herself as Sedina Roshian. He assumed it was a pseudonym, yet when he pressed her for the truth, she nervously confirmed that it was indeed her real name. Ludger was surprised by this. He could tell Sedina wanted to say something, though she kept glancing around nervously. Calmly, he assured her that no one outside the magic barrier he had cast could hear their words. Relieved, Sedina remarked that she expected such precaution from the First Order. Ludger instructed her not to call him that, insisting she address him as Professor instead. When she worried it might sound disrespectful, he firmly told her it was an order and reminded her that their discussion must remain secret. Sedina nodded, promising obedience. Ludger urged her to explain the situation. Sedina's expression grew serious as she revealed that the recent werewolf incidents were connected to subsidiary groups of their organization. These groups had conducted cryptid experiments using black magic and the teachings of the Shamsis school, a faction of scientists exiled for forbidden practices. She admitted she did not know the details but explained that the test subjects had escaped through the sewers and caused a massacre in Tion. Ludger's eyes widened at the revelation. Sedina quickly lowered her head, fearing she had said too much, but he encouraged her to continue. She explained that responsibility for the incident lay with the Shamsis school. She had been sent because she heard Ludger was tasked with handling the matter. She recalled that Victor Dreadful had once granted Ludger permission to use his name, which he confirmed, though he admitted he had not expected events to escalate this way. Sedina stressed that they needed to eliminate 3 targets quickly, but Ludger corrected her, stating that only 2 remained. He produced a token he had taken from a werewolf in Riederbelki 2 days prior. Sedina immediately recognized it and expressed her surprise. Ludger noted her ability to communicate discreetly without attracting suspicion. He wondered why someone so skilled was still placed in the Third Order, concluding that she likely had no choice. Perhaps she came from a noble family, which Black Dawn would never treat kindly. To him, she appeared like a puppet waiting to be discarded. He also realized that the balance within Black Dawn itself was beginning to fracture. He decided Sedina could become an asset. When Sedina confirmed that Sioran was unaware of the sewer escape, Ludger stood and thanked her for the information. He told her they would meet again if circumstances allowed, then lifted the protective barrier. Before leaving, he complimented her ability to express her thoughts, admitting he enjoyed their exchange. Sedina bit her lip and lowered her head, quietly thanking him for the praise as sadness crossed her face. Outside, Flora sensed a magical fluctuation. Catching sight of Ludger through the window, she silently cursed, wondering what conversation he had shared with the girl. Classes at Sioran Academy began soon after. During a lecture, Flora leaned her cheek against her hand and reflected on what she had witnessed earlier. Judging by the glow of the magical field cast at the cafe, it had clearly been a sound-blocking spell. Ordinary people would not have recognized the magical trace, yet Flora still could not understand why Ludger had used it or what his conversation there had involved. The professor soon concluded the lesson and issued a warning to the students. She explained that the circulating rumors were true and advised them not to wander across the campus late at night. Any violation would result in penalty points. The students immediately began whispering, wondering how much truth lay in the professor's words. At their desk, Leo leaned toward Aiden. Without waiting for a question, Aiden said it was about a werewolf. He admitted it would be wiser not to interfere, since losing points was not worth the risk. Leo sighed and closed his eyes, remarking that he had expected such an answer. Aiden then asked his opinion, and Leo admitted he agreed entirely. It was better to leave matters of such danger to the professors. At that moment, Tessie, the red-haired girl, approached and slapped her palm loudly on their desk. Aiden winced at the sound but quickly greeted her with a smile, while Leo responded with a weary sigh. Tessie demanded to know how anyone could call this morning a good one. Leo frowned and advised her to accept defeat and move on. Tessie snapped that their last match had ended in a draw, telling him not to interfere since this was between her and Aiden. She then turned to Aiden and warned him that she would not hold back this time, challenging him to a proper fight. Aiden, confused, hesitated before explaining that fighting now was not a good idea. Tessie angrily asked why, and he explained that classes occupied the day while students were required to stay indoors at night to avoid encounters with the rumored werewolf. Tessie smirked at his explanation, deciding he was simply afraid and looking for excuses. She studied him closely, waiting for him to admit it. In the end, Aiden conceded that she probably did believe that. Tessie then proposed another challenge: whoever caught the werewolf first would be the winner. Leo abruptly announced their agreement before Aiden could respond. Shocked, Aiden turned to him, asking why he decided on his behalf. Tessie, satisfied, told them not to think of backing out. Leo assured her they would be there but added smugly that she would regret it when she lost. By the time Aiden recovered, Tessie had already gone. He turned to Leo, asking why he had accepted such a reckless bet. Leo shrugged, saying Tessie would have dragged them in regardless, and besides, the professors would surely defeat the creature before they could. Aiden, however, felt Tessie was serious. Leo studied him and asked whether she was truly reckless enough to hunt a werewolf alone. Aiden admitted Tessie might not be what they assumed. Before they could argue further, they noticed Tessie already striding quickly down the street outside. They wondered how she had gotten so far so quickly. At first, it seemed she was returning to the dormitory, which gave them some relief. Yet suddenly, she turned away from that path and continued with determination, leaving both boys uneasy as night began to fall. Meanwhile, Ludger walked through the streets, reflecting that the night promised much work. He recalled Hugo asking him recently to watch over noble students in exchange for restoring his family's reputation. Hugo had insisted such a concession would not hurt. Ludger had noticed how uncomfortable Hugo seemed when addressing fallen nobles, though maintaining ties with Eliza might have been useful. Nevertheless, Ludger rejected the offer. He reminded Hugo firmly that Seoran Academy did not divide between nobles and commoners, and his stance would not change. Turning away, Ludger apologized, saying he needed to continue his patrols. Hugo tried to stop him, yet Ludger knew complying with Hugo's plan would risk exposure. He had no intention of angering Eliza either. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed movement in nearby bushes. With a sharp wave of his hand, he revealed several students hiding. They recoiled in fear as Ludger demanded to know why they were outside their dorms. One boy stammered an excuse, but Ludger cut him off and declared each would receive 5 penalty points. Counting quickly, he realized there were 20 of them. The numbers unsettled him. The reward for catching the werewolf had clearly drawn more attention than expected. If this continued, the situation could spiral into disaster. He resolved to intervene directly. Later, Ludger reached the wastewater treatment plant near the academy. Descending into the sewers, he recalled Sedina's report that werewolves had entered through the underground tunnels, the only system in Reederbelki they could exploit. He suspected the police had not checked this area. Lighting his way with magic, he soon discovered tracks. To his concern, there seemed to be 2 sets, one much larger than the other. All led in the same direction until, suddenly, the trail split. He studied carefully and determined that the larger beast was moving toward the academy, hunting. Deciding this was the greater danger, Ludger followed that path. His pursuit was cut short by a piercing scream. Without hesitation, he abandoned the tracks and sprinted toward the sound. Ahead, he saw a werewolf lunging at Lynn and Arender. Realizing he was too far to reach them in time, Ludger cursed silently and gathered magical energy into his cane. He unleashed a powerful attack, and the werewolf recoiled, howling as brilliant light engulfed it. The force threw the monster across the ground. Approaching, Ludger found Lin and Arender collapsed in fear. Arender screamed, while Lin, pale with horror, cried out his name. Coldly, Ludger ordered the students to gather near the estate. As they obeyed, he announced that each would receive 5 penalty points. The girls froze in disbelief, their mouths slightly open as they questioned whether they had heard Ludger correctly. Arender raised her voice, insisting that he should at least ensure they were unharmed. Ludger did not even turn to face her as he coldly demanded to know how she dared to raise her voice at him. Arender quickly explained that she spoke only out of concern for Lin's well-being. Ludger dismissed her words with sharp indifference. He remarked that Arender had completely ignored her own safety and was now contradicting herself. Lin, seeing her friend in distress, turned to Ludger with a request. She pleaded that Arender should not be punished, explaining that her companion had merely fallen asleep while studying. Ludger acknowledged Lin's loyalty but reminded her that she still needed to grasp the seriousness of the matter. Lin lowered her head, accepted her fault, and apologized. Arender smiled faintly at the difference in his attitude, though confusion quickly replaced the expression as she tried to understand why Lin had been treated with more leniency. Ludger then directed Arender to escort Lin back to the dormitory and declared that no penalty points would be given. Arender, stunned, asked again if she had heard him correctly. Ludger clarified that if she wished otherwise, he could reinstate the penalty points, and with that he rose to his feet and helped Lin stand. Arender quickly urged her friend to move along. At that moment, the werewolf, which had been lying motionless, suddenly stirred and growled. Ludger instantly assumed a combat stance. The girls cried out for him to be careful, but he responded curtly that he could see the situation perfectly. The creature froze, studying its opponent, before abruptly darting to the side. One of the girls screamed as the monster fled. Without hesitation, Ludger pursued the beast and ordered the girls to find safety. The werewolf leapt onto a tower, and Ludger, using his hook and chain, followed swiftly. Lin turned back, astonished by his movement. She asked Arender if what she saw was truly levitation magic, though Arender hesitantly admitted she could not be certain. Meanwhile, Ludger landed on the opposite tower where the werewolf clung. The two launched themselves at each other, clashing in mid-air before continuing their battle across the rooftops. Each sought an opening to strike. After one exchange, the werewolf pressed forward, forcing Ludger to dodge skillfully before countering with a burst of magic. The beast tried to retaliate, but Ludger ascended into the air and unleashed another spell at its back. Renee gasped in awe, while Arender whispered that this must be what true combat looked like. The enraged werewolf charged again, but this time Ludger stood his ground. Concentrating his mana, he released a focused attack that sent the creature crashing down. At the last moment, it managed to cling to the wall and halt its fall. Determined not to grant the monster another chance, Ludger prepared another spell. The blast struck hard, leaving the werewolf clinging to a narrow ledge in pain. Ludger realized his body was weakening. He had expended too much mana in a short time and reminded himself that he could not reveal his full power before the students. He resolved to finish the beast quickly and then locate its companion. The werewolf, however, lifted a paw, showing it could still move. It seized a stone, and Ludger instinctively flinched. The creature hurled the rock, forcing Ludger to raise a barrier, though the shards scattered dangerously around him. He cursed under his breath, questioning if such a monster was truly capable of wielding foreign objects in battle. The werewolf lunged with overwhelming force, shattering the rooftop beneath them. Through the chaos, the creature escaped. Ludger approached the broken edge and frowned. This enemy was far more cunning than he expected. Perhaps its base nature as a wolf granted it a sharp instinct to judge the strength of an opponent. A troubling thought passed through his mind. These might not be ordinary werewolves at all. Elsewhere in the forest, Leo and Aiden were searching for Tessie. They called her name repeatedly without response. Growing impatient, Leo suggested returning, reasoning that she might have already gone back to the dormitory. Aiden disagreed, reminding him that Tessie was not the type to give up, especially not after taking on such a reckless bet. Leo sighed but agreed to continue for another half hour. He began to explain what they should do if they still failed to find her, when a piercing scream cut through the air. Both froze, then Aiden shouted that it was Tessie's voice. He sprinted toward the sound, and Leo quickly followed. The two rushed through the forest, the cries mingling with the noise of blows and snarls. Suddenly, Aiden stumbled, pressing his forehead in pain as he fell. At that same moment, Tessie collided into him, equally breathless and shaken. She called his name in surprise and asked why they were there. Aiden answered that they had heard her scream, leaving Tessie briefly confused before she admitted everything had happened too suddenly. A low growl silenced them. Leo urged caution, and Tessie ordered them to follow quietly. They obeyed and hid in the bushes. Tessie led them to a clearing where they saw a small monster's face peering through the leaves. The sight left them speechless. Tessie, however, declared confidently that she had won. Leo objected, pointing out that she had only found the creature, not captured it. Tessie responded that she would catch it immediately, but Aiden stopped her. He explained that the werewolf could not even move, which was why it had hidden itself. He asked if she truly believed it had chosen this hiding place alone. Tessie suddenly remembered the warning about 2 werewolves in the area. Aiden admitted he could not confirm, but he suspected outside interference. His eyes then caught the glint of a chain around the small werewolf's neck. Shock filled him as he realized the creature bore something unnatural. Before they could investigate further, another werewolf emerged silently behind them. The werewolf growled, and Leo turned sharply at the sound. Aiden immediately followed his gaze. The monster raised its paw, ready to strike, but Leo managed to push Aiden aside in time, taking the blow himself. He screamed in pain as the force threw him to the ground. Tessie and Aiden cried out his name in panic while the creature prepared to attack again. At that moment, Aiden screamed, and Tessie realized in horror that they were indeed facing a real werewolf. Fear seized her body, yet she clenched her fists and forced herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that she had to protect her family. The werewolf turned to her and slashed forward, but Aiden shoved her away just in time. Tessie gasped as she saw Aiden shielding her with his own body. Leo called out desperately to his friend. Aiden, ignoring the pain, turned to Tessie and asked if she was safe. Tessie stared at him in confusion, wondering why he would risk himself for her. He could not answer clearly, only stating that he could not stand by while someone close to him was in danger. Tessie's eyes widened, but her focus quickly shifted back to the advancing creature. Aiden once again placed himself in front of her, determined to keep her from harm. He tried to reason with the others, suggesting that perhaps the werewolf was acting out of fear, protecting its cub. Tessie and Leo exchanged puzzled glances, unable to understand what he was attempting. Aiden kept his arms spread wide, insisting that the monster might listen. He promised aloud that he would not cause harm. The werewolf hesitated, staring at him cautiously before lowering its paw. Aiden stepped forward, urging the others not to interfere. The larger beast slowly moved toward the small cub hidden in the leaves, growling slowly as if guarding it. Aiden concluded that the ferocity they had witnessed came from its desperate attempt to defend its young. Tessie asked if the creature truly understood him. Leo remained skeptical, convinced the beast could strike at any moment. Aiden pleaded silently for their trust and raised a hand toward the monster. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a flask, wondering if the cub was sick. He admitted to himself that the potion inside would not cure it, but at least it could lessen the suffering. The werewolf stretched its paw and accepted the offering. Before Aiden could react further, a blazing attack pierced the beast's body. The werewolf howled in agony as a bright light spread across its frame. The students turned in shock as Ludger appeared before them, his presence heavy and commanding. Ludger addressed Leo, Aiden, and Tessie in a sharp tone, demanding to know why they were there. Tessie clutched her head in horror at the realization that it was their professor. Leo tried to explain, but Ludger silenced them coldly. He ordered them to return to the dormitory immediately. Tessie and Leo obeyed at once. However, Aiden stood firm, blocking Ludger's path. He begged for patience, insisting that the werewolf might retain some humanity. Ludger's expression hardened as he asked if Aiden realized how foolish it sounded. Aiden shouted back that it was not nonsense, but before he could say more, the smaller werewolf stirred. Ludger's eyes narrowed. Aiden froze under the weight of his glare, unable to move. In the next instant, Ludger shoved Aiden aside and unleashed a devastating spell. Both werewolves were consumed by fire and reduced to ashes. Aiden cried out helplessly as he watched, his voice breaking in horror. Ludger turned his back, declaring that the students would receive punishment the next day. By morning, the three sat silently at a table, burdened by shame. Leo clutched his hair with his bandaged arm, muttering that they had acted like fools and ruined themselves. Tessie burned with humiliation at her helplessness. Aiden sat deep in thought, unable to raise his head. The door opened, and Eliza entered with a composed expression. The students froze as they realized the rector had arrived. Ludger followed her in silence. Eliza spoke calmly, asking them to relax. Yet they knew that if she had appeared, the matter was far more serious than they had feared. Ludger demanded if they understood the severity of their actions. Leo admitted they expected a punishment worse than simple demerit points. Ludger confirmed it, reminding them that their reckless choices could have cost lives. Eliza, however, urged him to be gentler, noting that in the end no harm had come. Ludger replied sternly that their behavior could not be ignored. Eliza smiled faintly, then turned to Aiden. praising his courage in protecting Tessie. He denied it, but she assured him that everyone saw his intent. She declared that each of them would receive 10 penalty points, yet also 20 reward points for their bravery. Ludger yielded to her decision without protest. When the students left, Eliza asked Ludger if he was satisfied. She admitted surprise at his earlier request for leniency. Ludger thanked her but hoped the students would never learn of it. Eliza agreed, then asked about the werewolves. Ludger reported nothing unusual. She accepted his answer with relief, praising his efforts. Later, alone, Ludger sat in silence. The memory of the smaller werewolf rising haunted him. Closing his eyes, he recalled the glimpse of human skin on its lower body. A chilling conclusion formed in his mind. The creatures had not been born wolves. They were humans, forcibly transformed through experiments. Ludger felt no regret about burning the creatures he had encountered. His actions had prevented greater problems, and the memory of countless victims who had suffered at the hands of such monsters justified his choice. He repeated to himself that there had been no other path. Yet, the image of the young werewolf resurfaced in his mind, and his steps faltered. Reaching into his pocket, he retrieved a small glowing sphere, telling himself that this was the real issue he needed to resolve. Turning toward Hans, he admitted that he had a request. Elsewhere, Tessie glanced at Leo and asked how his arm was healing. Leo replied that it was fine, though he would need to keep it bandaged for a few more days. Aiden sat quietly between them, his head lowered, avoiding the conversation. Tessie looked at him with concern and asked if something was troubling him. Both she and Leo waited for his reply, and Aiden finally admitted he was fine, though he soon brought up the werewolf cub. He explained that the cub had been wearing a collar. Tessie reacted in shock, but Leo quickly told her to lower her voice. Aiden continued, saying this was one of the reasons he had tried to stop Ludger. He speculated that perhaps these werewolves were artificially created. Leo considered his words and mentioned the rumors of strange people lurking in the forest. Tessie asked if those stories were only fabrications. Leo confessed he did not know for certain but admitted that a werewolf with a collar was unusual. Aiden prepared to add something further, but Tessie interrupted, asking if he wanted to say anything about Ludger. Aiden admitted that he did. While he did not suspect Ludger of anything malicious, he had found the professor's expression strange at that moment. Aiden was convinced that Ludger had understood something critical. Tessie asked if Aiden believed Ludger was hiding the truth from them. Aiden was uncertain, but he wondered if Ludger knew far more than he revealed. Still, he tried to dismiss the thought, reasoning that perhaps it was only his imagination since their professor would never do something like that. Yet, doubt lingered within him. As these thoughts weighed on him, Tessie suddenly stood and declared that such speculation was nonsense. She reminded them that Eliza had confirmed Ludger's detailed account of the incident and insisted that he would never have done so if he had been complicit in it. She spoke firmly, stating that Ludger cared deeply for his students, even if he did not openly show it. She asked indignantly if they truly suspected their professor. Aiden conceded that Tessie was likely correct, and Leo added that there was little point in dwelling on such matters. Aiden then rose, stating that he was hungry and suggesting they eat together. Leo agreed, noting it was nearly lunchtime. When they invited Tessie, she hesitated, embarrassed, remarking that friends usually ate together. Aiden looked at her in surprise and asked if she believed they were not friends. Tessie flushed further but eventually agreed to join them. Later, Ludger spoke with Hans, asking if he had reviewed the documents. Hans confirmed that he had. Ludger explained that the files included the total number of missing people from Reederbelke and their meeting locations. Hans revealed that a group frequently gathered at an abandoned factory and suggested that was where Ludger should investigate. Ludger immediately understood and praised Hans for his good work. Hans added that several workers had also gone missing outside the city. Ludger asked if among them there was a family of 3. Hans confirmed that there was indeed one such case. Ludger then resolved to investigate the factory. That night, 2 guards stood watch outside the abandoned structure. One complained of boredom and asked how much longer they had to remain there. His partner told him they would stay 2 more days. Their conversation turned to the escape of certain captives. The first complained about the incompetence of others, while the second explained that the child had not received enough of the drug. The girl's cries had drawn attention, and the boy's parents had witnessed everything, complicating matters. The guard spoke of how the parents had already been converted and speculated on the fuss they had caused. One of them mentioned that these people likely had someone capable of solving such problems. His partner asked if it was worth worrying so much about a single child. Before he could continue, strange noises echoed through the corridor. They reached for their weapons, but 2 bullets pierced their skulls before they could react. Both men fell instantly. Ludger emerged from the shadows, his expression sharp with displeasure. He recalled Hans questioning whether he truly intended to face the group alone. Hans had warned that the site held around 40 individuals, including armed men, 2 magicians, and 3 fighters in full combat gear. The entrance lay through a sewer passage, and Hans had urged caution. Ludger had only asked one question: how old was the child? Hans had answered with wide eyes, saying the boy was 7. Walking past the lifeless guards, Ludger did not look back. Screams soon echoed through the halls as he moved forward, leaving corpses behind. A small insect trailed him, watching from the air. In another chamber filled with boxes, several people worked while speaking among themselves. One noticed the intruder and exclaimed with irritation that a rat had entered. Another suggested gathering everyone to handle the matter, while a third insisted the intruder was not security personnel. He remarked that this was even better, because if the man died, no one would search for him. Several armed men raised their rifles and shouted orders to fire. Before they could pull the triggers, confusion spread among them. Their weapons refused to respond, and panic surfaced in their voices. Ludger had already used his magic to disarm them, rendering their guns useless. With a calm motion, he concealed his firearm once more. One man, realizing the situation, cursed and barked for the others to hold fire. He understood that they were facing a magician. Another assessed quickly and declared that bullets would not work against such an opponent, urging them to switch to blades. Luger's hand brushed the weapon at his belt, and a faint grin formed on his face. The nearest man mocked him, convinced that the pistol would accomplish nothing. A heartbeat later, the report of a shot cracked the silence, and the mocking figure collapsed with a bullet lodged in his head. His companions froze in shock. Ludger only furrowed his brow, unimpressed by their reaction. Horror spread among them as they realized what had happened. One of them stammered that Luger's bullets were infused with magic. Panic erupted, and another soldier commanded a retreat, deciding to handle the situation himself. Drawing a pistol with a unique design, he aimed at Ludger with grim confidence. He shouted that no magical defense could withstand his weapon and pulled the trigger. A surge of electricity burst forward, engulfing Ludger in crackling light. The shooter laughed harshly, certain of victory. However, his confidence vanished when he saw the spell before him. A shimmering barrier enveloped Ludger, absorbing every trace of the current. The shield carried traces of elemental manipulation combined with alchemical metal, a clear sign of high-level magic. The man swore under his breath, realizing that his weapon was useless. Before he could act again, a sudden impact shattered the glass container mounted at his back, the very vessel that generated his electric discharge. Energy erupted violently, consuming him in arcs of uncontrolled lightning. His agonized screams filled the air before silence settled. When the smoke thinned, Ludger calmly surveyed the scene. Nearly 20 bodies lay lifeless around him. For a brief moment, he allowed the number to register, then his attention sharpened at an odd sound nearby. Without turning, he extended his arm and fired behind him. A small body dropped to the ground with a faint thud. It was a wasp, now lifeless. Suspicion narrowed his gaze. He realized he was being observed. These insects were not ordinary creatures, they were tools for surveillance. His thoughts drifted to the possibility that the notorious Vermin brothers, known for such methods, were involved. Deciding that the observers required elimination, Ludger pressed his boot against the ground. A magical ripple spread outward. The vibration affected several hidden wasps hovering in the vicinity. Their movements faltered, wings twitching violently before they dropped dead. In a dimly lit chamber elsewhere, a blond man monitoring the situation stiffened. The signal feeding through the insects had been severed. He recalled sensing vibrations earlier, similar to wind elemental magic. If Ludger wielded such destructive spells, then their situation had grown dire. He concluded that small insects would not withstand such energy. Larger reinforcements would be needed. The blond man turned to his comrade and warned Bruno to prepare. Bruno answered with curt resolve. Observing the likely route, they predicted the door through which Ludger would soon enter. The men inside readied themselves, nerves coiled tight. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness as the power failed. Alarm spread among them, and someone shouted for the backup generator. The blond man sneered, convinced that Ludger had orchestrated the blackout. He called Bruno but received no reply. Turning, he froze in horror. Bruno's head had been severed, his body already lifeless on the floor. The head rolled until it rested against the blond man's boot. He leapt back with a curse, shaken by how quickly Ludger had closed the distance. Only moments had passed since the lights had gone out. Desperation hardened his resolve, and he moved to attack before Ludger struck again. From his sleeve, a massive centipede slithered out. Before it could strike, it was cut neatly in two. The blond man spun, only to find Ludger advancing. Fear gripped him. He stammered, struggling to comprehend how a magician could excel in close combat. Clenching his teeth, he recognized the danger Ludger posed and instinctively widened the distance between them. Ludger's hand moved swiftly, crafting a glowing array of runes. The blond man recognized the formation and paled. A flamethrower spell. Flames erupted in a searing torrent, hurling him back and scorching everything in their path. The fire consumed his defenses and continued to burn through his body. Others in the room stared in disbelief. They could not fathom when Ludger had entered or how easily he had destroyed their defenses. As the blond man writhed in agony, his voice broke into a curse. His final thoughts were consumed by the mystery of the magician's identity. Without giving him the dignity of an answer, Ludger aimed his weapon and fired, ending his life. Terror spread among the remaining men. One whispered in dread that Ludger had just defeated the Vermin brothers as if they were nothing. Their fear magnified as Ludger's gaze turned upon them. At that instant, a strange sensation crawled up his senses. He leapt backward, narrowly avoiding a strike. A grotesque claw had extended from Bruno's corpse, slashing where he had stood. The body that should have been lifeless shuddered violently, then rose. A distorted mouth formed upon its palm and groaned in agony, lamenting that Ludger's swift attack had forced its premature emergence. Ludger's expression hardened. He questioned whether Bruno could truly transform into an insect, since decapitation had not hindered him. The twisted figure responded with chilling defiance, declaring that the body had reached a transcendental stage. Suddenly, Bruno's form convulsed violently. His body distorted further, twisting beyond recognition. A deafening explosion followed, erupting from his mangled frame and shaking the room with raw force. Ludger took a firm stance as he faced the massive insectoid monster looming over him. The creature spoke coldly of its dead brother, declaring it felt no grief, yet vowing to tear Ludger apart in vengeance. The atmosphere grew heavier as the men in the chamber panicked. One of them shouted for his comrades to flee, and the group scattered chaotically, trampled in the monster's rampage. The beast ignored their suffering entirely, showing no regard for the subordinates it crushed beneath its weight. Ludger moved swiftly to avoid the swiping claws. His mind lingered briefly on the recklessness of the creature, questioning its lack of concern for those who served it. Drawing his pistol, Ludger fired several rounds, only to watch the bullets bounce harmlessly from the monster's hardened exoskeleton. The beast retaliated with another powerful strike, though Ludger evaded once more. Concentrating, he summoned a burst of flame that roared across the room, yet the creature twisted its body with surprising agility and avoided the inferno. A frown crossed Ludger's face as he wondered how such a massive being could evade attacks with such precision. Before he could act again, the monster lashed out and clamped its claw tightly around him. The pressure constricted his chest as he forced another incantation into being. A sudden explosion of fire erupted, momentarily blinding the onlookers in radiant light. When the flames dissipated, Ludger stared at the monster in disbelief. Its body bore no burns, not even a mark. He questioned how such resilience was possible against a fourth-level spell. The creature struck again, laughing darkly as it explained that only a spell of at least the fourth level could wound it. Its massive limbs tore into the ground repeatedly, sending dust clouds into the air as its laughter echoed through the chamber. The monster suddenly halted mid-swing, staring at the cracked wall. Confusion spread across its face as Ludger's presence seemed to vanish. It searched frantically until a sound above drew its attention. The creature slashed upward toward the ceiling beam, splintering it in half. Yet Ludger was no longer there. He descended swiftly, landing behind the beast. The monster turned in surprise, remarking on his movements that resembled those of a winged insect. Ludger remained silent but acknowledged within himself that third-level weapons and spells were useless. Even a fourth-level spell offered little assurance. He had not anticipated using something greater, yet necessity left him no choice. Extending his hand, he formed a condensed sphere of energy, radiating immense heat and light. Meanwhile, outside the battleground, Hans shivered against the bitter cold. He muttered inwardly about needing warmer clothing while staring at his watch. In his estimation, Ludger should have concluded the fight by now. Fighting two dark magicians was never an easy task, yet Hans trusted Ludger's abilities completely. A sudden glow drew Hans's gaze upward. The abandoned building erupted with blinding light that soon became consuming fire. Streams of flame surged through the shattered windows, swallowing the structure. Hans's eyes widened as recognition struck him. This was Ludger's true magical power, though he struggled to recall its exact name. Clutching his head in confusion, Hans realized his understanding of magic had been shallow compared to what he now witnessed. When Ludger finally emerged, Hans rushed to him. He asked about the conclusion of the mission and what had happened inside. Ludger answered calmly, stating that the test subjects had been destroyed. Hans, troubled, asked if transformation into werewolves meant no return to a human state. Ludger confirmed it and explained that he granted them release from endless suffering. Hans pulled a syringe from his case, studying it with unease. It was the very serum that turned humans into beasts. He lamented the cruelty of a world where such experiments were carried out, certain that only vast funding could support such horrors. His indignation grew, yet Ludger interrupted, revealing he already knew the one responsible. Hans questioned him in disbelief, declaring such knowledge impossible. With a dismissive gesture, Hans advised him to forget it, claiming resistance was futile. He walked away, leaving Ludger in heavy silence. The scene shifted to a mansion where Bellbot Rickon hurled a glass dish at a maid, enraged by what he deemed unworthy food. Shards cut her forehead, drawing blood, yet neither she nor her companion dared resist. Bellbot cursed them, calling his staff useless parasites unworthy of the money he spent on them. Storming from the dining hall, he brooded over wasted investments and the incompetence of his servants in managing the experimental subjects. Nevertheless, he assured himself that results would soon arrive, ushering the next stage of his plan. With the serum, he would regain youth, strength, and perfection, rewards for years of pursuit. Entering his private chamber, Bellbot halted abruptly. Ludger stood on the balcony, addressing him by name. Shock froze Bellbot before fear drove him to demand the intruder's identity. Ludger advanced silently, striking him down. Bellbot called desperately for guards, but Ludger explained the futility of his cries, for a sound barrier surrounded the room. Ludger lifted Bellbot by the collar, stating he required only one answer. He asked him to imagine a child, forced to meet death with a smile of gratitude. Rage trembled through Ludger as he demanded to know how a man should feel when forced to burn an innocent family alive. Bellbot stared in bewilderment, then laughed as he realized Ludger had eliminated the escaped subjects. He suggested releasing him to negotiate, but Ludger pressed him harder. With arrogance, Bellbot claimed the deaths were meaningless. In his view, sacrifices for human progress were noble, even if they were children. Ludger's eyes hardened. He declared he had heard enough, then plunged the syringe into Bellbot's neck. The old man froze, his eyes widening in horror, before a scream tore through the chamber. Ludger observed with an indifferent gaze and noted that this was the very reason he felt no anger. After administering the injection, he released Bellbot and stood upright. Bellbot clutched his neck in confusion, demanding to know what had happened. Ludger replied calmly that he had studied the research records and found them intriguing. Even a small dose of the drug was enough to transform a person into a werewolf. His interest, however, lay in what would occur if a larger amount was consumed at once. At that moment, Bellbot's body convulsed, and a dreadful scream tore from his throat. His hand went to his neck as his fingers elongated into claws. His teeth sharpened into fangs, and his clothes ripped apart as his form expanded. The transformation completed in mere moments, leaving him a grotesque multi-armed monster, stripped of all resemblance to humanity. Ludger regarded him coldly, reflecting that words would never convey the suffering Bellbot had inflicted on others. Instead, he resolved to make him experience it firsthand. Stretching his hand forward, Ludger dissolved the barrier that had muffled the sound. Bellbot's screams echoed throughout the corridors of the mansion, drawing immediate alarm. Guards and attendants, startled by the terrifying cries, quickly determined that the sound came from Bellbot's quarters and rushed toward the source. When they entered the room, they froze in horror at the sight of the monstrous figure. None of them understood what had happened or where such a creature had come from. One guard raised his wand and declared that it must be subdued. Another, also armed with a wand, commanded those without magic to search for Bellbot. The magicians unleashed a barrage of spells, their attacks striking relentlessly, though the creature proved astonishingly resilient. Despite this, they increased their magical firepower, unwilling to relent. Elsewhere, inside a smaller building on the estate, Hans examined the contents of a safe with wide eyes. He asked how much of it there was. Ludger, turning toward him, said he could take some for his work, though the rest must be hidden. As Ludger prepared to leave, Hans asked if he was already departing, pointing out how long it had taken them to infiltrate the mansion. He urged Ludger to take a look around first. Ludger responded briefly that he would return, though next time they would need someone more suitable for cover. Hans acknowledged his words and wished him well. Later, Ludger walked alone along the city streets. He paused by the river and turned toward a ship sailing downstream. His hand clenched into a fist before he set his gaze forward once more and continued on his path. By morning, news spread quickly, and a large crowd gathered at Rickson's mansion. The people were stunned to hear that Bellbot had been devoured by a monster. One man recounted that, according to the guards, no trace of Bellbot had been found, only the raging beast. Another suggested that the old rumors of Bellbot's dealings in dark magic were indeed true. Questions followed about the creature's fate. The reply was grim. The magicians had incinerated it, and the burning had lasted an hour before it was finally destroyed. Amidst the discussions, attention shifted as a young woman in uniform approached the mansion, accompanied by the Night Snake Knights. Leading them was Grandmaster Tarina Lionhowl. Onlookers speculated in surprise that the National Security Agency had intervened. As Tarina drew closer, the guards at the gate faltered. One cried out as she ordered him to open the gate. Though he hesitated, explaining that he had been instructed to deny entry, her stern insistence left no room for refusal. He relented, and with his comrade's agreement, the gate swung open. Tarina entered with a focused expression, followed closely by the red-haired Enya and the bespectacled Lloyd. Chief Inspector Taborin saluted them respectfully and expressed his honor at their arrival. Tarina thanked him but firmly declared that the case now fell under the authority of the National Security Agency. She ordered him to hand over all evidence and withdraw his team. Though surprised, Taborin complied and commanded his men to leave. Once the others had departed, Enya sighed, admitting it had been difficult to maintain her composure. Lloyd quickly reminded her that appearances were part of their duty as nightcrawlers. Tarina silenced them both, urging confidence and seriousness. She reminded them of their purpose, and their expressions grew stern once more. They soon reached the crime scene. The body had been burned beyond recognition. Tarina remarked on its grotesque form and noted that rumors linked Belbot not only to dark magic but also to cryptid hunting, making the presence of such a monster no coincidence. Lloyd, reviewing his notes, confirmed that Belbot's death aligned with the witness's testimony. Enya leaned closer to the remains, observing that the body had been reduced to charred bones, eliminating any hope of gathering evidence. Searching further, Tarina noticed a painting slightly displaced on the wall. Pushing it aside revealed a hidden door. Investigating the niche, she discovered it empty. Judging from its structure, she concluded that it once held a safe. Lloyd recalled that Belbot had been suspected of amassing illicit wealth, and Enya realized this could have been where he stored it. They speculated that the safe had been taken recently, likely the previous night. Tarina considered the chain of events carefully. A murdered nobleman, a monstrous transformation, and the disappearance of a safe could not be mere coincidence. Someone else had clearly been involved. Yet the greater mystery was how that person had vanished without leaving any trace. Only one man came to mind. In her thoughts, she envisioned Arne Lupin. When Lloyd asked about the name, Tarina dismissed it as unimportant and redirected him to recall unusual recent incidents in Reederbelki. He reported that there had been an explosion in an abandoned factory shortly before Belbot's death. Tarina immediately recognized its importance and instructed them to head there for further investigation. Ludger sat with his face buried in his hands while an unpleasant ringing filled his ears. His jaw tightened, and pain crossed his expression as he cursed inwardly, knowing that these side effects would one day push him beyond his limits. True magical power demanded an immense toll, and he understood that without the pills designed to preserve his mana, his condition would already be far worse. Gradually, the discomfort lessened, and he pulled his hands away from his face. At least, he thought, the laboratory and its werewolves had been reduced to ashes, leaving no trace of evidence behind. For now, he could consider the matter settled. Nevertheless, another problem weighed on his mind. He recalled Aiden, the student who had stood in his path until the very end. Ludger suspected that his own emotions might have surfaced in that instant, and since Aiden had been closest, there was a chance he had noticed something. When Ludger unleashed fire upon the werewolves, he had shown no hesitation, yet even a single heartbeat could have been enough for Aiden to glimpse what should have remained hidden. The thought unsettled him, though he hoped it would ultimately amount to nothing. If not, he knew there might come a day when silence would have to be enforced with blood. He paused, fists tightening at the memory. Aiden had promised the werewolf that he would not harm him. That memory made it clear that killing this student was impossible. It was far too risky, for Aiden was no ordinary student and was under Eliza's close supervision. Any harm to him would cast immediate suspicion upon Ludger. For now, the only option was to rest and allow his body to recover. Reclining onto the bed, he closed his eyes, reminding himself to focus on healing. In the quiet, another memory surfaced. A boy had once told him that a traveling magician had taught him a strange magical technique during childhood. Ludger wondered briefly if that had been coincidence or a piece of some larger pattern. Elsewhere, Tarina, Lloyd, and Enya arrived at the ruins of an abandoned factory. Tarina examined the charred rubble with a stern gaze. Enya stared in disbelief at the devastation, remarking that the entire building had been burned down. Lloyd observed that in a place like this, finding anything useful would be nearly impossible. Tarina walked further, contemplating how a fire could have erupted here just before Belbot's death. Lloyd suggested that the factory might have been abandoned only in name, while in truth it was being used in secret. Terina agreed, noting that otherwise such destruction would not have occurred. Enya proposed that dark magicians or cryptid hunters could have been conducting experiments here and, upon being discovered, destroyed everything to conceal their research. Terina considered it plausible and added that the real question was who had interrupted them. She suspected that the arson had not been random but deliberate, meant to erase all traces. Yet she also allowed that it could be an odd coincidence. Seeking more clarity, she asked Lloyd if there had been any other incidents. Lloyd mentioned the recent disturbance with a werewolf at Seoran Academy. That caught Terina's interest. She pressed him for details, and Lloyd explained that the creature had escaped through the sewers, injuring 3 students before being subdued by a professor. Terina was not surprised by the academy's poor security, though she asked if the body had been recovered. Lloyd explained that nothing remained of it since the corpse had burned away. At that, Terina fell silent, staring at the charred ruins before her. She began to connect the fire here with the burned werewolf. The possibility that both were linked by the same hand grew stronger. If that were true, then the culprit was a direct threat to the Empire, precisely the sort of enemy the Order of the Nightcrawlers existed to pursue. Later, in Seoran Academy's classroom, the students filled the air with chatter. Some whispered that Professor Ludger had hunted werewolves, while others repeated that he was once a military officer. Amid this noise, Lin anxiously searched for a seat. Most of the desks were taken, and no one seemed willing to move for her. She felt the sting of avoidance from her peers until she noticed one empty seat. Approaching it, she saw Arender waving cheerfully to her. Grateful, Lin sat beside her, though she could hear the hushed complaints of students outraged that a plebeian had taken a seat next to the princess. Lin tried to compose herself, recalling the moment during Luger's pursuit of the werewolf when she had awkwardly asked Arender if he would truly be safe. The princess had reassured her then, reminding her that Ludger was a professor of Seoran. Now, sitting at the desk, Arender encouraged Lin to call her sister, pointing out that in Seoran, everyone was equal. Lin was quietly amazed that a princess personally ensured her classmates returned to their dormitories and approached someone like her without hesitation. As their quiet conversation unfolded, Ludger entered the classroom. His presence immediately drew silence. He moved to his desk and announced that the lesson would cover the characteristics of manifestation, along with the principles of elemental magic. With a wave of his hand, sheets of paper appeared before each student. Ludger explained that magic formed the foundation of most manifestations, yet he intended to introduce a new method to broaden their abilities. Flora leaned forward, eager to witness what he had prepared. Ludger stated that this method could amplify their elemental strength from 20 to 80%. The students exchanged murmurs of disbelief and curiosity. He called upon Anthony, asking which attributes he possessed. Anthony replied with water, ice, and plants, before demonstrating ice magic. Ludger acknowledged the effort yet warned that perfection remained distant. He then channeled his own energy, forming a delicate snowflake in his palm. Tessie gasped in awe, while Leo observed that it was on an entirely different level. Closing his fist, Ludger dissolved the snowflake and reminded the class that they would now begin with theory. Flora's eyes narrowed, her attention fixed on him with intense curiosity. Ludger explained to the students that the history of elemental magic attributes originated from the manifestation realm. It had once been considered the original form of magic but was now regarded only as a step in the spell-casting process. He displayed before them the 4 basic elements that began the practice of magic and pointed out that, compared to the 10 elements now used, the foundation appeared simple. After dispelling the demonstration, he asked the class what had caused such an immense leap in magical development. He promised that whoever answered correctly using the element of fire would receive 5 points. A boy raised his hand and said that people used fire to dispel darkness. The girl beside him argued that fire was used to clear forests through burning. Ludger dismissed both answers as superficial and asked if there were deeper possibilities. Another student spoke, claiming that fire had saved humanity from the grip of the darkness everyone feared. Ludger replied dryly, questioning if he intended to become a poet. At last Flora raised her hand, and Ludger called on her to speak. She stated that fire was first used as a weapon to harm people, to burn them. Ludger confirmed that this was correct. Murmurs of surprise spread through the class. He explained further that burning, drowning, wind blasts, and electric shocks had all been employed as methods of war and killing. These uses had pushed the development of magic to new heights. Yet, in times of hardship, fire symbolized survival rather than destruction. He continued, explaining how water became vital in powering wheels, wind turned the blades of mills, and electricity illuminated cities. The purpose of elemental attributes changed depending on how people chose to wield them. He reminded the students that their own studies must be guided by the thought of striving for a better future. With this, he announced the beginning of practical work and instructed everyone to form an elemental sphere. As the students began, Ludger turned to Joseph and told him to focus on the flow, remarking that for a second-year student his release of energy was unpolished. He next addressed Lin, asking if what she had created could truly be called a plant attribute. He compared it to a rotting autumn leaf and advised her instead to imagine a sprout breaking through the soil. Leo whispered that Ludger never softened his criticism, yet his attention soon shifted when he noticed Aiden sitting with clenched fists, doing nothing. Tessie also looked, both confused by his inaction. Ludger approached Aiden, his expression serious. He wondered if Aiden intended to rebel after the incident with the werewolf. The puzzled look on Aiden's face quickly showed that this was not the case. Ludger guessed the reason and asked if Aiden had not yet practiced elementary manifestation. Aiden admitted that he had not and, embarrassed, apologized. Ludger realized that Sioran's special student lacked even basic knowledge. He thought privately that he could not take responsibility for someone who needed every concept explained from the beginning. Nevertheless, he asked Aiden to name his attributes. Aiden eagerly declared that he possessed fire, water, and wind. Ludger instructed him to attempt fire and resolved to teach him, unwilling to abandon a student who needed help. He told Aiden to accumulate magical energy and asked if he understood the basics of manifestation. Aiden confirmed, leaving Leo and Tessie surprised. Ludger then instructed him to shape it into fire. Aiden tried but quickly failed, discouraged. Ludger told him that intention alone was insufficient. True manifestation requires opening one's emotions. Closing his eyes, Aiden concentrated. Ludger told him to remember the brightest flame he had ever seen, to recall its shape, sound, and scent. Memories surfaced. 8 years earlier, during a snowstorm, Aiden had smelled burning logs and the aroma of stew. He had fed a small fire while hearing his sisters complain and his mother mutter, watching his father smile warmly after returning home. That winter, when food was scarce and cold winds cut through thin clothes, the fire in the hearth had been their comfort. Guided by the memory, Aiden opened his eyes and saw flames flickering between his palms. He exclaimed in astonishment, overwhelmed by the warmth. Ludger praised him, observing that his fire warmed rather than harmed and reflected his own thoughts. The class watched in amazement as Ludger explained that the flame contained Aiden's own magical power. He instructed him to remember this feeling. Aiden lost focus, and the flame vanished. Ludger reminded the class that this was the method he had described earlier. They were to rely on feelings and experiences, not only knowledge. He explained that understanding fire's heat or ice's chill was too basic, something even a child could do. A true magician infused uniqueness into every spell. He told them to recall moments meaningful to them and to engage all senses. Anthony followed these instructions, producing a glowing sphere in his hands. He cried out in surprise, realizing it worked. The student beside him noted the improvement. Soon the entire class attempted the method with excitement. Flora alone remained unimpressed, resting her cheek against her hand. She thought she had already mastered such things and expected to learn something new today. Watching Aiden, she wondered why Ludger praised him for simple manifestation. She clenched her trembling fist, unable to reconcile this with the professor who had humiliated her earlier. She decided she would show her strength. Activating her magic, she attempted to impose attributes. Cheryl, seated next to her, looked on in shock as the class realized Flora was performing a complex technique. Flora aimed to combine wind with water to form a whirlpool, but suddenly her spell destabilized, flaring dangerously. Cheryl cried her name in alarm as the light intensified. Students panicked and fled, warning one another. Flora gritted her teeth, determined to contain it with a barrier to avoid an explosion. At that moment Ludger stepped forward. He placed his palm near her spell and urged her to control the flow. Shocked, Flora met his gaze as he promised to assist. With his guidance, the unstable power slowly began to settle. He reminded her not to falter or it would dissipate. She realized he was right and resolved to finish what she had started. Flora lowered her head and focused on her magic while Ludger, keeping his hand near hers, observed intently. She recalled how the eyes on her were always filled with envy or disdain. She tried to push such feelings aside, yet the weight of memory pressed down. An image of her father rose before her, tall and cold, his indifference cutting as though she did not exist. That vision merged with the memory of Ludger, who once deducted 10 penalty points from her in front of everyone. She remembered how, on that day, the humiliation stung deeply, making her feel true defeat for the first time. That shame pulled back unwanted memories from her childhood. Though she could not see Ludger's current expression, she imagined it mirrored her father's cold stare. Inside, Flora vowed that the Lumos family would never forgive humiliation. She swore to herself that one day she would face Ludger and defeat him. Her thoughts broke when she noticed the spell stabilizing before her. The magical waves calmed, and she realized she was close to success. She shaped the spell completely and silently rejoiced at the result. Relief filled her, yet Luger's sharp gaze unsettled her. He recognized that she had acted recklessly. He explained that failure while attempting new things was natural, yet placing fellow students in danger was unacceptable. Flora's head sank as shame washed over her. She muttered her regret while Luger added that her attempt to impose two elements at once had been clumsy. Confused, she frowned and asked what he meant. Luger clarified that she had tried to merge fire and ice, two directly opposed elements. He reminded her that such a task was extremely difficult. Flora admitted silently that she had pushed too far when she attempted to add a third element, but she still believed her pairing of ice and fire had been flawless. Luger paused before extending his palm. Two elements appeared and began to merge smoothly. Flora watched in awe as he told her that she had indeed managed to freeze flames, and while the sight was beautiful, beauty alone was meaningless without purpose. He pressed her to consider what she had been trying to achieve. Flora lowered her head again, and he assumed she only sought attention. She closed her eyes without replying. Cheryl placed a hand on her chest and whispered Flora's name in concern. Luger then released his combined spell upward, where it erupted at the ceiling, scattering snowflakes throughout the classroom. Leo cried out in surprise, and Tessie questioned aloud if it was truly snow. Flora realized that Luger had combined the reach of fire with the chill of ice to produce something useful. Her own attempt had failed, yet his had created a practical spell. Luger called Flora's name, and she looked up. He told her that he did not doubt her skill. She blinked in surprise, wondering what he meant. Luger admitted she possessed extraordinary talent, unmatched among students of her age, and her technical precision was remarkable. Still, he cautioned that talent was secondary to purpose. He suspected she was performing for the crowd rather than seeking her own path. He advised her, for her own good, to choose another goal. Flora stood frozen, repeating his words internally. As he addressed the rest of the class, he instructed them to return to their seats. She noticed that his eyes carried no reproach or mockery, only genuine concern that she had never seen, not even from her father. She closed her eyes and rubbed her forehead. Cheryl rushed to her side, asking with worry how she felt. Flora replied weakly that her mana use had caused a headache and that she felt faint. She watched Luger's back as he left. Her thoughts turned to him, recognizing that he had surely spent even more energy than she had. At the same time, Luger clenched his jaw and reminded himself that taking a pill before class had been the correct decision. His head throbbed, but he hid it well. His mind returned to Flora, acknowledging that she had nearly completed a high-level spell involving 3 elements. He remembered how his own teacher had scolded him harshly for similar recklessness. He wondered if he had been too severe and hoped his words had not wounded her. Even if they had, he trusted that she would endure, for his advice had been genuine. Luger reflected that none of these students were weaklings. Eliza's earlier remark about this year's intake being a golden generation now seemed true. The classroom brimmed with potential. His thoughts were interrupted when he noticed Lynn, who lowered her head nervously. He realized that she was unable to manifest an elemental attribute at all. She admitted as much, and Luger dismissed the class, instructing them to review the material as homework. He asked Renee to accompany him to the office, leaving the others surprised. Later, in the office, Lynn sat uneasily on the sofa. Luger told her to wait, and she did so with dread. She wondered if he intended to expel her for failing to manifest magic. The thought terrified her because she cherished his lectures and did not want to be transferred. When she saw documents in his hand, she feared they were papers for reassignment. Her anxiety peaked, and she convinced herself that Luger intended to discard her. When Luger called her name, she interrupted him, pleading that she would do anything as long as she could remain in his class. He regarded her with confusion and handed her a textbook. Lynn stared at it, startled. Luger explained that it was designed for independent study, a book that could open a new path in magic. Realizing it was not elemental, she asked where he had obtained it. He answered that it was the life's work of someone he once knew, a mage of non-elemental magic, though that person was no longer alive. Lynn's eyes softened as she saw the sorrow in his expression. Lynn finally asked Luger if her inability to manifest an element meant she would never be able to learn other types of magic. Luger confirmed her fears and asked if the thought upset her. She admitted that she wished deeply to study elemental magic, but he posed another question. Luger asked her what she thought of a magician who could only control a single element. Lynn suggested that such a magician might lack talent. Luger disagreed and explained that this belief was mistaken. Magicians who could control only one element often possessed extraordinary talent in that singular domain. Their ability could reach the level of altering natural phenomena, and that was the mark of a true professional. Lynn understood his meaning, and Luger confirmed her thoughts before shifting her attention. He asked what she thought of non-elemental magic. Lin considered carefully and answered that non-elemental magic did not rely on the use of traditional elements. Ludger interrupted before she could elaborate further. He reminded her that such a theory had not been proven, because the 10th element, metal, was still treated as a branch of earth. He assured her that the world of magic evolved continuously and there was no need to despair. With a calm gesture, he handed her the book and assigned it as her study. Once Lin departed, Ludger closed his eyes in thought. Meeting a student who displayed potential in non-elemental magic had been a surprise. He recalled the earnest expression on her face and felt that she already carried the discernment to distinguish truth from falsehood. She was still at the beginning of her path and unaware of the weight of her potential, yet Ludger recognized that the book had chosen its rightful owner. He decided that this was fate. Elsewhere, Aiden concentrated magical energy in his palms, practicing diligently. The technique Ludger had demonstrated proved useful beyond expectation. Aiden remembered the calm and wise expression Ludger had shown during the demonstration, and guilt rose within him for having doubted him earlier. Observing Tessie and Leo as they also practiced, Aiden convinced himself that someone who truly loved magic could not be a villain. His focus broke when he noticed a commotion nearby. Students had gathered around another boy, and Aiden wondered who drew such attention. Jeevan appeared, asking if this was Aiden, the same student unable to manifest his element. Jeevan accused him of arrogance for still remaining in the academy. Leo frowned, intending to step in, but Aiden gestured for him to remain calm. He confronted Jeevan himself, admitting he did not know why Jeevan disliked him yet apologizing nonetheless. Aiden proposed leaving the matter behind. Jeevan pretended to accept but added that forgiveness would come only if Aiden knelt before him. Tessie grew furious and demanded that Jeevan stop, reminding him that nobility did not give him the right to humiliate others. Jeevan silenced her harshly, claiming that the fallen had no voice and mocking Aiden as mediocrity. Tessie's anger deepened, but Aiden stepped forward. He warned Jeevan that he could say what he wished about him but must not insult or threaten his friends. Jeevan clenched his jaw and then smirked, declaring that if the matter could not be resolved peacefully, then they would resolve it differently. He threw down his gauntlet and challenged Aiden to a magical duel. Aiden picked up the gauntlet and accepted. Tessie cried out in alarm and Leo asked him what he was doing, but Aiden ignored them. He declared that if he won, Jeevan would owe an apology to both Leo and Tessie. Jeevan agreed with a grin, warning Aiden to prepare for defeat. At that moment, Ludger appeared, his voice steady as he demanded an explanation. Relief washed over Aiden, while Jeevan groaned in frustration. Ludger remained outwardly composed, though inwardly he grew irritated that Aiden had once again entangled himself in trouble. Jeevan protested, insisting the duel was fair because Aiden had accepted. Ludger reminded them that magical duels among first-year students were forbidden. His gaze swept the crowd until it landed on Freuden, who was observing with interest. Ludger realized Jeevan sought only to impress Freuden. Ludger declared that no punishment would be given since nothing had occurred yet, and he ordered the students to return to their quarters. Jeevan prepared to object when Chris intervened, asking Ludger to be less strict. Chris accused him of exceeding his authority, arguing that teachers had no right to forbid a voluntary duel. Several students supported Chris immediately. Ludger recognized that Chris had achieved his aim, but he insisted he would not allow students to harm one another. Chris proposed a compromise, suggesting Ludger attend as a witness instead. Ludger turned to Jeevan and Aiden, and both confirmed their intention to fight. With reluctance, Ludger agreed. Chris smiled and proposed a wager. Ludger accepted at once, catching Chris off guard. Chris announced his wager on Jeevan, praising his natural talent. Jeevan glowed with pride at the words. Ludger countered by placing his wager on Aiden. The crowd reacted with surprise, and Chris laughed, feigning confusion at Ludger's faith in Aiden. Nevertheless, he accepted the terms. Chris suggested that the wager should be their research records, since both taught spell practice. Ludger agreed and set the duel for 4 days later. Chris left, masking his fury with a smile. Inwardly he seethed at the humiliation and vowed that Ludger would regret the day he had challenged him. After Chris departed, Aiden apologized to Ludger, knowing the conflict had begun because of him. Ludger silenced him and told him to think only of victory. He reminded Aiden that Jeevan had the advantage, yet every battle contained unforeseen variables. Ludger explained that Aiden already possessed such a variable and only needed to apply it correctly. Aiden lowered his head, reflecting that this was true. His determination returned as he remembered words once spoken by a girl who had encouraged him. With renewed will, he declared to Ludger that he wanted to defeat Jeevan using only his own skills. Ludger was stunned by his resolve, but when he looked into Aiden's eyes, he saw that his decision would not change. He agreed to prepare him for the duel, though he warned the training would be harsh. Aiden remembered the girl who once instructed him never to use certain techniques without absolute necessity. She warned that reckless use would only lead to serious trouble. The younger Aiden had looked at her intently, and she explained that these techniques were her livelihood. If he misused them, she might be forced to starve on the streets. Alarmed, Aiden had promised that he would not allow such a fate for her. Placing her palm on his head, she clarified that she was not forbidding him from using them entirely. There would come a moment when a person must make a decisive choice, and when that moment arrives, one must follow the call of the heart. Now, as he stood before Ludger, Aiden carried that determination within him. Ludger outwardly appeared composed, yet inwardly he burned with frustration. Aiden wanted to fight with nothing but his own strength, even though Ludger had already wagered on him knowing his unusual abilities. Confused about the skills that Aiden spoke of, Ludger eventually sighed, recognizing that regardless of the reason, this was an opportunity to test the boy's progress. He promised to train Aiden for the upcoming duel, warning that the training would resemble torture. Victory could not be guaranteed, but Aiden accepted the terms without hesitation. Ludger announced that they would begin at once, already picturing how the smug faces of their opponents would shift in 4 days. That night, Aiden lay on his bed in exhaustion, feeling as though he had nearly died during the training, and it was only the first day. He questioned the source of Ludger's confidence in him. Since he did not practice elemental magic, he wondered if Ludger knew something about his potential that even he himself did not. At the same time, Chris was burning documents with a candle flame. He noted that Ludger was giving personal training to Aiden. While he admitted that Ludger did not display it openly, he knew the professor deeply desired the boy's victory. Turning to Jeevan, Chris asked what his true goal was. Jeevan replied that he wanted to defeat the arrogant commoner, but Chris pressed further, insisting that this battle represented the unbridgeable gap between aristocrats and commoners. From his desk, Chris retrieved a potion and handed it to Jeevan. The student was shocked, realizing it was a magical booster, and warned that if caught, he could be expelled. Chris assured him that it was a special invention of the Benamor family and no one would ever discover its use. He insisted that Aiden would surely resort to any method to win, so Jeevan should do the same. Reluctant yet unwilling to appear weak, Jeevan accepted, tucking the potion away. The day of the duel arrived, and the training field was filled with students. The stands buzzed with animated discussions. Some speculated that Jeevan would win due to his aristocratic background and higher level of training, while others argued that Aiden had proven himself before, recalling his role in the werewolf incident. Although Ludger had ultimately subdued the beast, Aiden's part was not forgotten. Several students noted that Aiden's training under Ludger gave him an advantage. The conversation turned toward Chris, with some remarking that he supported the aristocrats and supervised Jeevan, while others remembered that both he and Ludger taught spell practice, which often invited comparison. Hearing this, Chris clenched his jaw in annoyance, quietly vowing to humiliate Ludger before everyone. Eliza arrived with Hugo at her side. She greeted Chris warmly, and then approached Ludger, remarking that it had been some time since they last met. Ludger bowed respectfully, assuring her that he was well. Curious about the rumors, she asked who he had bet on. Ludger confirmed his support for Aiden, which drew her attention to the stakes. She expressed hope that no one would be harmed, and Marie calmly explained that protective gear would shield the participants. The atmosphere grew more intense as Aiden and Jeevan entered the arena, greeted by shouts of encouragement from both sides. Leo urged Aiden to crush the arrogant aristocrat, while Tessie encouraged him to keep moving forward. Jeevan's supporters demanded that he display his true power. Before the duel, an instructor checked both combatants. Aiden reminded Jeevan of his promise to apologize to Leo and Tessie should he lose. Jeevan merely smirked, declaring that such a thing would remain a dream. When the instructor noticed the training sword on Aiden's belt, Aiden explained that it was merely fashioned like a blade but not an actual weapon. The instructor confirmed that it was harmless and allowed it. Raising his arms, he outlined the rules. The one whose protective barrier broke first would lose. With that, the duel began. Both Aiden and Jeevan released spells at the same time, their attacks colliding with equal force. Leo commented on their pace, while Tessie marveled at their speed. Aiden quickly realized that Jeevan was using fire, the strongest element, and frowned. Jeevan admitted to himself that Aiden's resilience exceeded his expectations. Unless his mana far outmatched Aiden's, the fight would remain difficult. He decided to end it quickly, amplifying his power and blasting through Aiden's defense. The spell missed Aiden narrowly, striking the wall with an explosion, as Aiden dodged and prepared a counter. Jeevan sneered, declaring inwardly that a commoner must learn his place. Aiden steadied his dull blade, channeling mana into a new spell. Their attacks clashed once again, yet Leo could already see Aiden struggling. Tessie gasped, realizing that Aiden was beginning to falter. Acknowledging that he would lose at this pace, Aiden resolved to use the technique Ludger had taught him. As Jeevan prepared another spell, he rushed forward. Believing that Aiden was surrendering, Jeevan laughed mockingly. Chris, watching from the sidelines, smiled smugly, already convinced of the outcome. Yet his expression changed as realization dawned. He recognized the technique that Aiden had chosen. Concentrating, Aiden formed a magic circle along the blade of his training sword. His brow furrowed in focus as he advanced without hesitation. Chris was taken aback when he saw Aiden performing the pillar technique. He wondered how the boy had learned such a martial arts technique and quickly assumed that Ludger might have been the one who taught him. Almost at once, however, a more pressing question came to his mind. Aiden had mastered the pillar technique in only 3 days, something that should have been impossible. Meanwhile, Aiden continued his charge, closing the distance between himself and Jeevan. Panic grew in Jeevan's chest as he tried to make sense of what was happening. For as long as he had trained in magic, he believed that concentration was the key. Watching Aiden sprinting forward in such erratic movements made him certain that it would be impossible for his opponent to cast properly under those conditions. Convinced that the fight was still under his control, Jeevan steadied himself. He had already completed a spell, and he believed he could easily disrupt Aiden's concentration with it. He launched the attack toward the side, confident it would succeed. Yet Aiden evaded at the last second, and Jeevan's spell tore through the arena's protective barrier instead. A wave of panic surged through Jeevan. Nothing seemed to work. Before he could react, Aiden unleashed a beam of energy from a magic circle prepared earlier. It shot forward and struck Jeevan squarely on the forehead, sending him crashing to the ground with a scream. Standing over him, Aiden pointed his sword down and declared that it was Jeevan's turn to yield. In desperation, Jeevan tried to resist, only to cry out in pain moments later. The stands erupted in thunderous applause at the outcome. The presiding professor raised Aiden's hand, announcing his victory. Leo shouted in amazement, impressed that Aiden had proven himself a formidable opponent, while Tessie remarked that his training had clearly paid off. From the crowd, a student angrily accused Jeevan of disgracing the aristocracy. A girl beside him admitted she had always suspected Jeevan relied only on his noble status. Now he had fallen to a commoner. Murmurs spread through the stands, with many labeling Jeevan a disgrace and a loser. Shaken, Jeevan clenched his jaw, unable to accept what had happened. Convinced Aiden must have cheated, he reasoned that no one should be able to move so freely while casting. Rage consumed him, and he swore that he would kill Aiden. He began weaving another spell, his magic flaring with reckless intent. Tessie leapt to her feet, outraged, and demanded to know what he was doing. Leo shouted for him to regain his senses, while other students warned him to stop before someone got hurt. At that critical moment, the professor stepped forward, shielding Aiden with his own body. Aiden frowned as memories of his mentor's words surfaced in his mind. Life, he had once been told, always presented a choice. He recalled her face clearly, her voice urging him to follow his heart. Without hesitation, he leveled his sword and slashed through Jeevan's raging spell. The flames scattered harmlessly across the arena, hurting no one. When the light faded, Aiden dropped to one knee, exhaling heavily. The crowd erupted with astonishment, marveling at his ability to cut through magic. Ludger sighed quietly, thinking the boy was stubborn, though he acknowledged that Aiden had chosen the perfect moment to use the technique. Chris stood frozen, immediately recognizing the anti-magic skill. He wondered how Aiden could combine such an ability with a sliding maneuver. Across the arena, Jeevan trembled, unable to steady his breathing. Aiden stepped forward, and Jeevan instinctively recoiled. The next strike sent him sprawling again, clutching his hand in pain. Aiden admitted he had hoped Jeevan would accept defeat honorably, but he was disappointed to see such pettiness instead. A red-haired student nearby smirked and commented that Jeevan did not even know how to lose with dignity. He turned to Freuden and asked him to confirm his view. Freuden, a second year, crossed his arms indifferently. He declared that Jeevan had never mattered to him and shifted his gaze to Aiden instead. This boy, he decided, was worth paying attention to, as he had once again proven his superiority over nobles. Rising to his feet, Freuden told Henry it was time to leave, and his companion followed. Before departing, Freuden glanced briefly at Ludger, who remained seated, calmly observing the duel. Chris frowned and asked Ludger if he had known about Aiden's anti-magic. Ludger confirmed it and asked what the issue was. Chris pressed further, but Ludger countered by pointing out that Chris, responsible for first years, had not even reviewed their files properly. In any case, anti-magic had not altered the outcome of the duel. Standing, Ludger reminded Chris that they were supposedly debating research. Chris confirmed this and asked if Ludger sought to claim credit. Ludger denied it, stating he had no interest in appropriating the work of others. With that, he left the stands, leaving Chris behind in seething frustration. Later, Ludger encountered Sedina in the corridor. She congratulated him on the victory but noted he was now drawing more attention and asked if that troubled him. He assured her it was not a problem, explaining that Eliza had begun to take interest. Since the rector already knew about their infiltration of Sioran, earning her trust would be difficult. He admitted that was why he used the duel to make an impression, though he knew it would not be enough, and he would need Sedina's help. When Sedina asked what he meant, Ludger gestured toward the side and explained that their meetings would raise suspicion unless she became a student. He asked her to lower the risks by blending in. Thrilled to receive what she took as a personal mission, Sedina promised to do everything possible, even if it cost her life. Ludger sighed and told her that such sacrifice was unnecessary. She quickly corrected herself, vowing to live and succeed in the mission instead. Finally, Ludger allowed her to proceed as she wished. Ludger spent some time in deep thought, concluding that the recent duel had helped convince everyone he was acting in Eliza's interests. At the same time, he sent a clear message to Black Dawn that he would not act recklessly. Yet he understood that such a situation could not last forever. The idea grew in his mind that he needed to form his own organization, one that would allow him to maneuver independently. As he considered the requirements for such a step, the glowing sphere on his desk interrupted his thoughts. He picked up the sphere and asked for a report. Hans's voice emerged, confirming that he had checked the underground areas and gathered intelligence about the movements taking place there. This information suggested a possible way to secure their position. Before Hans finished, Ludger declared that it was time to use force. Hans agreed that the moment had come for heavier measures. Narrowing his eyes, Ludger decided that he would leave at once. Hans hesitated, asking if he was not too busy for a prolonged conflict. Ludger reassured him that he would handle matters swiftly. Later, in a noisy tavern, drunken voices filled the air. A customer slammed his mug on the table in frustration, drawing the attention of a companion who asked the reason for his anger. The red-haired man cursed, complaining that Belbot had been responsible for returning their investments, yet had died and left them empty-handed. Another man suggested they seek another source of profit, but the red-haired man insisted on discussing their next steps to expand their operations. His words halted when a stranger entered the tavern. The tavern keeper tried to dismiss the newcomer, declaring the place closed. The man ignored him and continued forward. Irritated, the red-haired patron raised his voice and demanded again that the stranger leave. The unexpected guest, however, calmly addressed Dottie, head of the Crimson Society. Suspicious, Dottie asked how the man knew him. The stranger replied that although they had never met, Dottie's reputation was too widespread to ignore. He introduced himself as James Moriarty. Dottie recognized the name immediately, recalling that Moriarty was known as the shadowy consultant who influenced the criminal networks of the kingdom. He had always remained hidden, and Dottie wondered what brought him here. With a laugh, he admitted that he had heard the name before. Ludger, wearing the guise of Moriarty, acknowledged the remark. Dottie questioned whether he should believe the claim, glancing at his men who began to stand ready. Ludger asked if Dottie suspected him of being an imposter. The head of the Crimson Society admitted that his arrival was too strange to accept easily. Ludger raised a hand with a careless gesture and advised restraint. Without turning, he sensed the pistols aimed at him. Turning slowly, he noted the number of weapons and warned that they would prove useless. Dottie ordered his men to fire. When they pulled the triggers, their guns failed. Ludger completed the turn, summoning glowing magic circles in the air. He reminded them he had already warned against rashness. Dottie panicked, realizing that silence of fire magic had been cast. An explosion rocked the tavern as debris scattered. From behind a broken wall, a monstrous figure pushed its way inside, its growl echoing through the room. The terrified men whispered that it might be a werewolf. The beast walked to Luger's side and stood calmly. The bandits trembled, suspecting he had tamed it, recalling rumors of his power. This creature, in truth Hans under disguise, had been prepared for such an appearance. Hans explained earlier that the city was divided among 4 criminal groups, the largest being the Crimson Society, which handled the dirtiest work and dominated the area. Ludger determined that this was their true target. Hans admitted that dismantling such a force would not be easy, suggesting they could begin with weaker members. Ludger dismissed the idea as a waste of time, preferring a direct assault against the leaders. Hans warned that the timing was poor since gangs had only recently consolidated. Ludger confirmed that this occurred after Belabot's death and noted the likely connection between the Crimson Society and that event. Hans speculated that the faction had carried out Belabot's dirty work and that his death had enraged them. Ludger concluded that this anger and unity made it the perfect moment to crush them. Hans voiced concern, stressing that they were not facing ordinary thugs but dangerous mercenaries, including half-knights. Ludger responded with calm certainty that they were still far from a true knightly order. He emphasized that Hans's role was essential. Hans realized Ludger planned to use him for intimidation and protested that if battle broke out, he would flee immediately. Ludger only asked him to maintain the appearance of a fearsome werewolf. Dottie, observing the scene, realized that whether or not this man was Moriarty, it was foolish to underestimate him. The fact that he had subdued a werewolf convinced him that this was indeed the true Moriarty. He admitted his initial doubt but now accepted the claim. Ludger, satisfied with the effect, stated his purpose. He intended to establish a business in the city. Dottie expressed surprise and offered his help. Ludger refused, making clear that he despised corrupt groups like the Crimson Society. He announced that his real aim was to put an end to them. Dottie's expression shifted from shock to fury. He drew his dagger and ordered his men to kill Ludger. Before the strike landed, Ludger swung his staff and struck Dottie. Another bandit prepared to attack, but Hans drew Ludger's attention to the fact that none of them intended to run. Ludger ordered preparations for retreat and drove his staff into the floor. Shadows spread across the tavern, engulfing the bandits in darkness. Screams rose as panic overtook them. Ludger extracted a hidden dagger from his staff and examined the blade with a grin. He had unleashed the dark magic of the third circle known as Fool's Sleep, and the Crimson Society would now face its consequences. Blood splattered across the ground as steel tore through flesh, the clash of weapons echoing in the dim chamber. The spell unleashed moments earlier had blanketed the room in oppressive darkness, its essence rooted in shadow and fear, crafted to crush the morale of weakened opponents. The curse had drawn from the magic of connection, linking fear and illusion together. Dottie, sprawled on the floor with panic etched across his face, barked desperately for Ludger to be killed, his voice breaking as he demanded why it was taking so long. The two mercenaries faltered, their hands frozen on their weapons as the dying screams of their comrades filled the room. The bandits, overwhelmed, begged for mercy, crying for Ludger to end the slaughter. With a flick of his hand, Ludger cast a spell upon their swords. When the men swung, the oppressive veil of darkness that had cloaked the room shattered in an instant, leaving the carnage revealed. Dottie's eyes widened in disbelief at the sight. In the middle of countless corpses stood Ludger, calm and collected, his lips curled into the faintest smile. The two remaining attackers roared in unison, swearing that he must die. They lunged, their blades cutting forward with practiced precision. Ludger blocked their strikes with his own weapon, quickly recognizing that their aura could slice through magic itself. Knights stood before him, not mere thugs. Even so, his confidence did not waver. He parried with precision, deflecting every blow without allowing his composure to falter. Still smiling, Ludger hurled a flask to the ground. Smoke burst forth, curling and spreading until the entire space was consumed. One knight staggered back, covering his face and shouting that it could be poison, urging retreat. His partner dismissed the fear, reminding him that their protective magic would hold, and activated it with practiced confidence. The reassurance lasted only seconds. A volley of daggers streaked from the smoke, forcing the knight to slash them aside. He mocked the effort, declaring it pointless, until the realization struck him too late. Mixed with the daggers had been glass vials. The shattered shards embedded into his arm, releasing a corrosive agent that ate into his flesh. His scream filled the chamber as his arm began to rot, skin blackening and muscle decaying under the spreading poison. The second knight recoiled in horror, questioning whether Ludger had laced the blades with toxins and how he could have possibly discerned their weakness with such precision. His comrade, clutching the disintegrating arm, cursed loudly and demanded to know where Ludger was hiding. From the ground, his own shadow stirred unnaturally. Darkness surged upward, twisting into form until Ludger emerged from within it. With ruthless precision, he drove his blade into the knight's skull, silencing him instantly. The lifeless body collapsed as Ludger pulled his weapon free, casting the corpse aside without sparing a glance at the blood that splattered across the floor. The remaining knight's jaw clenched tightly, his eyes narrowing, while Dottie recoiled in terror. With grim defiance, the surviving knight asked if the man before him was truly Professor Moriarty, recalling the man's reputation as one who had shown no fighting ability. Ludger, indifferent to the remark, offered no explanation. His opponent observed closely, convinced that Ludger's focus was weakening, and believed that patience would reveal a path to victory. He surged forward, eager to close the distance. Another flask arced through the air. The knight sneered at the attempt, dismissing it as futile. He dodged past the smoke, only to feel his sword dragged to a halt. Tendrils of shadow clung to the blade, preventing him from pulling it free. Ludger exploited the opening without hesitation. Drawing a pistol, he leveled it at his opponent. The knight cursed, realizing he would need to abandon his sword and retreat. His instincts urged him to move, confident in his reflexes, yet his body froze as horror consumed him. A jagged spike of shadow erupted upward, impaling him from within his own silhouette. He looked down in disbelief as the darkness pierced through his chest. His mind reeled, unable to comprehend how such magic could extend so far from its caster. His legs buckled, and he crumpled to the ground. Ludger lowered his pistol, stepping past the body without pause. Dottie collapsed further into the floor, trembling violently as Ludger approached. Adjusting his hat with a faint grin, Ludger invited him to resume their interrupted conversation. Later, he poured himself a glass of strong liquor, the smell of iron still heavy in the air. Hans approached, his disguise discarded, and asked how Ludger could drink after such bloodshed. Ludger glanced at him, noting the unease in Hans's expression. Hans muttered that the stench of blood was unbearable and gestured toward a corpse, asking if the man had died from fright. Ludger replied calmly that not yet. Now that he had extracted the necessary information, he intended to hand the man over to other organizations. Hans, sitting beside him, expressed certainty that Ludger would manage it. He inquired about the drink, lifting the glass curiously. Ludger answered that it was Gorgonison, aged 38 years. Hans, surprised, questioned if he meant to drink alone. Ludger reminded him of his illness and noted that the rest of the glasses had been broken. When Hans's cup was finally filled as well, he asked what Ludger planned to do with the Crimson Group. Ludger replied that he intended to recruit useful individuals and discard the rest. He also mentioned that documents and ledgers upstairs would assist Hans in his work. Hans sighed at the weight of the task, wondering aloud if it was too much. Ludger assured him that help could be arranged. Stunned, Hans asked if Ludger truly believed such allies would come. Ludger recalled their promise to join once their own affairs were concluded, questioning whether Hans hated them so deeply. Hans scoffed, calling them mad, yet admitted he had no right to judge. Though wary, he conceded that he would follow Ludger's plans. He voiced concern about Eliza's suspicions, asking if Ludger feared such bold moves. Ludger traced a finger along the rim of his glass, instructing Hans to relax. He was confident Eliza's magicians would not risk pursuit, especially under her scrutiny. Hans found the reasoning sound and asked if Ludger had decided on a name for their new organization. Ludger considered and asked how many members they had. Hans replied that including themselves, 10 in total. After a pause, Ludger proposed the name UNON. Hans repeated it slowly, questioning if Ludger truly intended to call them unknown. When Ludger affirmed, Hans smiled, admitting he liked the sound of it. They filled their glasses once more, and Hans lifted his drink high. Together, they toasted the creation of a new organization, sealing their pact in the lingering silence of the blood-stained room. Selina approached Ludger one afternoon and asked why he did not have an assistant. Ludger froze at her words, turned to look at her seriously, and after a pause replied that he did not require one. Selina, remembering with surprise that he lectured to nearly 80 students, asked if it was not difficult to manage everything alone. Ludger answered firmly that he could handle it without difficulty. Selina admired his ability, remarking that his capability was almost unbelievable. Ludger did not respond further, listening instead to the astonished voices of his colleagues who found it unusual that he managed without assistance. Some wondered aloud if he truly worked alone all the time. After a moment, Ludger turned the focus back on Selina and asked whether she herself had an assistant. She admitted that she did, though she explained she did not actually need help, which was why she limited herself to only 3. Her answer made Ludger pause again. He recalled her words and compared them with the usual number of assistants among professors. Many had 10 or more, yet she considered 3 unnecessary. While reflecting on this, a commotion erupted behind him. Chris appeared, chased by a crowd of students who clearly served as his assistants. Ludger realized that Chris possessed far more than 3. Not long after, Marita commented that he too should consider hiring assistants. Bro agreed, warning that daily work would only become more demanding without help. Closing his eyes, Ludger finally accepted their advice, although reluctantly. Later, seated in his office, he thought about the subject again. Assistants were not only paid but often received tutoring or guidance that advanced their own training. Some new professors managed with 6 assistants, and many of those assistants used the position to study magic directly under their mentors instead of following standard academic subjects. Ludger drew a long breath and reflected that the academy truly resembled a modern university. He admitted it would not hurt to relieve himself of minor burdens, yet selecting the right assistant was not a simple matter. His gaze fell on a stack of papers to the side. Among them was a list of students. At first he did not consider it urgent, but as he skimmed through the names, one stood out and caught his attention. He decided that he could invite her to assist him. Later, while walking along the corridors, Ludger suddenly stopped, sensing a presence nearby. He closed his eyes and remarked that if Sedina had any questions, she could approach him freely. From around the corner, Sedina answered, stepping into view with an apology for following him. Ludger thought it unusual, since students rarely behaved this way, yet he reassured her that it was acceptable. In fact, he wanted to ask her something himself. He inquired whether she had classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 and noon. Sedina replied that those hours overlapped with his lectures, but she did have free periods then. She asked if he intended to assign her something. Ludger stepped closer with a faint smile and said that her availability was ideal. He offered her the role of his assistant. Sedina was shocked and confused. She doubted her own ability, questioning how she could possibly fill such a role. Ludger explained that being his assistant would allow her to communicate with him more freely. She wondered if this was suspicious, but he reassured her by pointing out that she had appeared on the official list and that his choice was logical. He also told her that he would not insist if she declined. Sedina frowned in thought but then answered with determination that she would accept. Pleased, Ludger instructed her to bring the official documents within 2 days. Sedina agreed, and Ludger considered this an excellent beginning. It would make his work easier and allow him to gather information about the Black Dawn more efficiently. To his surprise, Sedina returned within an hour carrying the completed paperwork. Ludger studied her carefully, narrowed his eyes for a moment, then took the documents and praised her diligence. She thanked him sincerely. Ludger felt satisfied that he had acquired an assistant more quickly than expected. Soon, in the classroom, the students discussed the rumor animatedly. Lin observed the unusual noise, and Arender explained that people were saying Ludger was searching for an assistant. Lin found the idea tempting, while Arender pointed out that the matter was even more interesting since Ludger had never done such a thing before. Everyone believed he barely acknowledged that assistants existed. Lin struggled to understand how that could be, considering his reputation. Arender shifted the topic and mentioned another rumor, one about the World Stone, said to grant the wishes of whoever possessed it. Some claimed it was hidden somewhere in Seorin. Lin questioned if such a thing was truly possible, and Arender insisted that it was. She explained that the world still contained countless mysteries and that Seorin, as the heart of magic, could very well hold such a treasure. She admitted she might exaggerate but maintained her conviction. Flora, listening from nearby, dismissed their conversation as childish fantasy. She insisted that if such a stone existed, the authorities would have seized it already. Still, she admitted to herself that Ludger, whom she privately regarded as a man of extraordinary ability, was indeed recruiting assistants. Assistants were carefully chosen, and naturally only talented students like herself would be suitable. Closing her eyes, Flora resolved to prove herself worthy if someone recommended her. Their chatter ended abruptly when another student warned that the professor was approaching. Flora immediately froze. Everyone then noticed Sedina carrying teaching materials, realizing she was likely Ludger's new assistant. Flora was astonished to learn he had already chosen one. When Ludger entered, he acknowledged Sedina's work and dismissed her. The students stared in shock, while Ludger simply reminded them that class was beginning. After the lecture concluded, Ludger announced that the material covered would appear on the exam and advised the students to review thoroughly. Julia Plumhart raised her hand, capturing his attention. Ludger addressed her by name, recalling that she had placed first at the entrance ceremony and that the magic tower supported her. Julia, surprised he remembered, asked how he selected his assistants. Ludger wondered at her curiosity, then explained that he alone made the choice. Julia pressed further, asking whether magical skill or reputation played a role. Ludger, amused, realized she was searching for insight rather than answers. He explained that the only factor he valued was character. With a firm tone, he added that after such a question, he doubted she could ever succeed in an interview with him. Julia fell silent, narrowing her eyes in frustration. Seeing no more questions, Ludger ended the class and reminded the students to prepare well for their first exam.